Hello, everyone. I am the narrator, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. The headlights of my old Chevy flickered, casting an eerie glow on the empty highway stretching endlessly before me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, willing the car to keep going just a few more miles, I thought. But fate had other plans. With a sputter and a wheeze, my faithful companion of 5 years gave up the ghost. The engine died, and I coasted to a stop on the shoulder, darkness enveloping me like a shroud. No, I muttered, turning the key desperately. The engine whined but refused to turn over. I slumped back in my seat, the reality of my situation sinking in. Here I was, Sarah Coleman, 28 years old, stranded on a deserted stretch of Highway 41 at, I glanced at my watch, 11:43 p.m. I reached for my phone, my lifeline in this modern world. The signal bars mocked me. One measly bar flickered in and out. I dialed 911 anyway, praying it would go through. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice crackled through the static. My car broke down on Highway 41, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. I'm alone and it's dark. Can you send someone? Can you give me your exact location, ma'am? I squinted at the darkness outside, looking for any landmarks. I'm not sure. The last sign I saw was for Millbrook, about 20 minutes ago. All right, I'll dispatch a patrol car to search the area. It might take a while. Can you stay with your vehicle? Yes, I replied, my mouth dry. How long do you think it'll be, given your location? It could be up to an hour. Is there anyone you can call to wait with you? I thought of my empty apartment, of the friends I'd left behind when I moved for this job. No, there's no one. After hanging up, I sat in silence, the weight of my solitude pressing down on me. The occasional whoosh of a passing car on the opposite side of the highway only emphasized how alone I was on this side. I rolled down the window a crack, letting in the cool night air, the chirping of crickets, and the rustle of wind through the tall grass lining the road provided an unsettling soundtrack to my vigil. A flicker of light in my rearview mirror caught my attention. Headlights approached from behind, growing larger. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was the patrol car, earlier than expected. The vehicle slowed as it neared, and I squinted against the glare. It wasn't a patrol car, but an old pickup truck. It crawled past me, going well below the speed limit. I couldn't make out the driver through the tinted windows. Murmured to myself, probably checking if I need help, but the truck didn't stop. It continued down the highway, its red taillights disappearing into the distance. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. I alternated between checking my phone, still barely any signal, and scanning the road for any signs of the promised patrol car. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror again. My heart leapt, then immediately sank as I recognized the shape of the pickup truck. It was coming back, just like before. It slowed as it approached my car. This time it came to a complete stop about 50 feet behind me. The headlights stayed on, illuminating my car in harsh white light. I sat perfectly still, my hands clenched in my lap. Why weren't they pulling up beside me? Why? Just sit there. Long seconds stretched into minutes. The truck didn't move. I couldn't see any movement inside it either, just those headlights pinning me in place like a butterfly on display. My breathing quickened. Should I get out? Wave them off? The doors were locked, but suddenly the car felt like a trap rather than a shelter. After what felt like an eternity, the truck's engine revved. It pulled out, swinging wide around my car as it passed. I caught a glimpse of the driver, a dark silhouette, head turned towards me. I couldn't make out a face. The truck accelerated away, leaving me in darkness once more. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "It's nothing. Nothing," I said aloud, trying to convince myself. "They were just checking on you twice without stopping to ask if you need help. Totally normal." I laughed nervously, the sound too loud in the quiet car. I glanced at my watch again. Only 20 minutes had passed since I'd called 911. It felt like hours. I tried to distract myself by rummaging through my purse. Gum wrappers, loose change, an old pack of tissues. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. The pepper spray my dad had insisted I carry. I pulled it out, holding it tightly. A new sound cut through the night, a low, steady hum. I looked up, hope and dread warning in my chest. Headlights again, but not the patrol car. The pickup truck was back. This time it pulled up right behind me, so close I couldn't see its license plate. The headlights bored into my rear view mirror, filling my car with harsh light. I squinted, trying to see the driver, but could only make out a dark shape. My fingers tightened around the pepper spray. What did they want? Why didn't they say anything? The driver's door opened. I held my breath, my entire body tense. A foot appeared on the running board, then a leg. The driver was getting out. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands. No signal. The one bar was gone. The dark figure emerged fully from the truck. Tall, broad-shouldered, definitely a man. He stood there for a moment, half illuminated by his own headlights. Then he started walking towards my car. My mind raced. Should I drive? The engine was dead, but maybe if I let it roll... No, the highway was too flat. I'd never build up enough speed. The man was halfway to my car now. I couldn't see his face, couldn't tell if he was looking at me, but I felt his attention like a physical weight. 10 feet away. 5. He stopped right beside my driver's side window. I clutched the pepper spray, my thumb on the button, my other hand was poised over the car horn. If he tried anything, I'd spray him and lean on the horn. Somebody would hear. Somebody had to hear. We sat in tableau for a long moment. Me, rigid in my seat. Him, looming outside my window. I waited for him to speak, to try the door handle, to do something. Instead, he simply stood there, watching, waiting. A single bead of sweat rolled down my back. Then slowly, he raised his hand. I tensed, ready to spray. He knocked on the window, 2 sharp whoops. "Everything okay in there, miss?" His voice was surprisingly normal, gruff, but not menacing. I blinked, thrown off balance. Yes, I managed to say loud enough to be heard through the glass. "My car broke down. I'm waiting for a tow." He nodded, stepping back slightly. Now that he wasn't blocking the light, I could see him better. An older man, maybe in his 60s, with a weathered face and a trucker's cap. "I saw you sitting here earlier," he said. "Thought I'd check to make sure you were all right. It can be dangerous being stranded out here alone." The adrenaline that had been coursing through me started to abate, leaving me feeling slightly foolish. Of course, he was just being a good Samaritan. I'd let my imagination run wild. "Thank you," I said, managing a weak smile. "I appreciate you checking." "The police should be here soon." He nodded again. Good. Well, I'll just wait here with you until they arrive. If that's all right, don't want to leave you alone out here." Before I could respond, a new set of headlights appeared on the horizon. As they drew closer, I saw the welcome sight of a patrol car's light bar. The old man turned to look, then back at me. "Looks like your ride's here. You take care now, miss." He walked back to his truck as the patrol car pulled up. As an officer stepped out, the pickup truck pulled away, disappearing into the night. I rolled down my window as the officer approached. "Are you Sarah Coleman?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, relief washing over me. "Thank you for coming." As the officer called for a tow truck, I glanced in the direction the pickup had gone. Had I overreacted? Maybe. But as I thought back to those long minutes of uncertainty, the way the truck had circled back again and again, I couldn't shake official. Lingering sense of unease in the end. I'd never know for sure if the old man had simply been a concerned citizen, or if his intent had been less benign. But one thing was certain. I'd never look at a deserted highway the same way again. As I climbed into the patrol car to wait for the tow truck, I made a mental note to get my car checked out as soon as possible. And maybe, just maybe, to reconsider that job offer in the city. Suddenly dealing with traffic jams didn't seem so bad after all. The creak of the barn door echoed through the still night air, a sound as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. But tonight, it sent a chill down my spine. Something wasn't right on the farm. And at 73 years old, I'd learned to trust my instincts. I'm John Hawkins, and this land has been in my family for 4 generations. I've seen drought, flood, and everything in between. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that moonless night in October. The day had been like any other. I tended to the crops, fed the animals, and settled in for a quiet evening with my dog, Old Blue. But as the clock struck midnight, a series of strange noises jolted me from my light sleep. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Old farms make all sorts of noises, especially on windy nights. But this was different. There was a rhythm to it, almost purposeful, and it was coming from the barn. I sat up in bed, my joints protesting the sudden movement. Old Blue lifted his head, his ears perked. He heard it too. "What do you think, boy?" I murmured, reaching for my glasses. "Should we check it out?" Old Blue's tail thumped against the bed in response. At least I wouldn't be facing whatever it was alone. I slipped on my boots and grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand. Its weight was reassuring in my hand, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it might not be enough. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I made my way downstairs, Old Blue padding quietly behind me. The noises from the barn grew louder, more distinct. There was a clanging like metal on metal, and then a thud that made me jump. I paused at the back door, my hand on the knob. Part of me wanted to go back to bed, to pull the covers over my head and pretend this was all a bad dream. But I knew I couldn't. This was my land, my responsibility. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving the farm shrouded in darkness. My flashlight cut a weak path through the gloom as I made my way toward the barn. Old Blue growled low in his throat, the hair on his back standing up. "Easy, boy," I whispered, though my own heart was racing. As we neared the barn, the noises suddenly stopped. The silence was almost worse than the sounds had been. It felt expectant, like the whole world was holding its breath. I reached around the interior, taking in the familiar sight of stalls and farm equipment. Everything looked normal. And yet my eyes landed on my old tractor. It had been moved, pulled out from its usual spot in the corner. Tools were scattered around it, glinting in the flashlight's beam. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and gray in the vast space. "Is anyone there?" No answer, but I could have sworn I heard a shuffling sound from the back of the barn. Old Blue, wind pressing against my leg. I reached down to pat his head as much for my comfort as his. I took a few steps further in, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine, these were larger, and the tread pattern was unfamiliar. They led deeper into the barn toward the back where we stored hay bales. My throat went dry. Someone had been here, maybe still was here. I should go back, call the sheriff, but curiosity or maybe stubbornness propelled me forward. I followed the footprints, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. Old Blue stayed close, his warm presence a small comfort as we neared the back of the barn. I heard it, breathing, soft but unmistakable. Someone was hiding behind the stack of hay bales. I stopped, my flashlight trained on the spot. "I know you're there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come on out now and we can talk about this." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from behind the hay. My flashlight illuminated a young man, barely more than a boy, really. His clothes were ragged, his face smudged with dirt. He squinted against the light, holding up a hand to shield his eyes.
"Please," he said.
His voice hoarse.
I didn't take anything, I just needed a place to sleep.
I lowered the flashlight slightly, taking in his appearance. He was thin, too thin, with a haunted look in his eyes that spoke of hard times. "What's your name, son?" I asked, my initial fear giving way to concern.
Michael.
He replied, still tense, ready to bolt at any moment. I nodded, considering this wasn't the first time I'd found someone seeking shelter in the barn. Though it had been years, times were tough all over. "Are you hungry, Michael?" He hesitated, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. I sighed, feeling the weight of my years. "Come on, up to the house. We'll get you something to eat and you can tell me your story." Michael's eyes widened in surprise.
You're not calling the police?
"Not unless you give me a reason to," I replied. "Now come on, it's too cold to stand around jawing all night." As we walked back to the house, Old Blue trotting ahead, I couldn't help but reflect on the night's events, the fear I'd felt, the certainty that something sinister was afoot. It all seemed a bit foolish now, but then, as Michael stepped into the light of the back porch, I saw something that made me pause there. Peeking out from under his sleeve was a tattoo, a symbol I recognized from news reports about a string of burglaries in the area. Our eyes met, and I saw the moment he realized, ID noticed, tension crackled in the air between us. I had a choice to make. This boy was clearly mixed up in something bad, but he was also just a kid, hungry, scared, and alone. "Let's get you that food," I said, finally opening the door, "and then we're going to have a long talk about the choices you've been making." Michael hesitated for a moment, then nodded, relief and trepidation warring on his face as I ushered him inside. I knew the night was far from over. There would be difficult conversations ahead, maybe even a call to the sheriff. But for now, there was hot food to be made, and perhaps a lost soul to be guided back to the right path. The barn door creaked again as a gust of wind blew across the farm, but this time the sound didn't fill me with dread. Instead, it reminded me of all the stories these old buildings had seen. Stories of hardship, yes, but also of redemption and second chances. I closed the door behind us, shutting out the darkness. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight there would be warmth, food, and a chance for understanding. And sometimes that's all it takes to change a life. As I watched Michael wolf down a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the real intruder I'd confronted tonight wasn't in the barn at all. It was fear. Fear of the unknown, of change, of the world outside my familiar routines. By facing that fear, by choosing compassion over suspicion, I'd not only potentially changed this young man's life, but my own as well. The farm suddenly felt less like an isolated outpost and more like a beacon of hope in a troubled world. Old Blue settled at my feet, his watchful eyes never leaving Michael. In that moment, I realized that the intruder had given me something precious, a reminder that even at my age, there were still new experiences to be had, new lessons to be learned. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I poured another cup of coffee and prepared for what promised to be a long and challenging conversation. But for the first time in years, I felt truly awake, truly alive. The night's adventure had started with a creaking barn door and inexplicable noises. It was ending with a chance to make a real difference in someone's life. And isn't that, after all, the greatest adventure of all? The harsh glare of fluorescent lights made the rest stop bathroom feel like an operating room, sterile and unforgiving. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the fatigue of 12 hours on the road. As I reached for a paper towel, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The bags under my eyes told a story of sleepless nights and endless miles. Little did I know, those tired eyes were about to witness something that would haunt me for years to come. My name is Alex, and this was supposed to be a simple road trip. My girlfriend Megan and I were driving cross-country to start our new life together in California. We'd been on the road for days, the monotony of highway lines and fast food stops blurring into a single, endless journey. It was just past midnight when we pulled into the rest stop. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few semi-Rs and a beat-up RV. Megan had been asleep for the last 100 miles, her head resting against the passenger window. "Hey," I said softly, gently shaking her shoulder. "We're stopping for a bit. You need anything? She stirred, blinking owlishly in the harsh overhead lights of the car. Maybe some water and a snack? I nodded, grabbing my wallet from the center console. I'll be right back. Lock the doors, okay? She mumbled in affirmative. Already drifting back to sleep, I watched her for a moment. A small smile playing on my lips, even exhausted and rumpled from the long drive, she was beautiful. The night air was cool as I stepped out of the car, a welcome change from the stuffy interior. I stretched, feeling my spine pop in several places. The rest stop loomed before me, an oasis of light in the vast darkness of the surrounding desert. As I approached the building, I noticed a man leaning against the wall near the entrance. He was smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing bright in the darkness. Something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way his eyes followed me as I walked past, or the too wide smile he gave me. "Evening," he said, his voice grayly. I nodded in response, quickening my pace slightly. The sooner I got in and out, the better. The interior of the rest stop was bright and empty. My footsteps echoed on the linoleum as I made my way to the vending machines. I grabbed a couple of water bottles and some snacks, then headed for the bathroom. And that's where I found myself now, staring at my reflection and trying to shake off an inexplicable feeling of dread. I dried my hands and gathered our supplies, eager to get back to Megan and hit the rope again. But as I pushed open the bathroom door, I nearly collided with someone. It was the man from outside. He stumbled back, apologizing profusely. "No worries," I muttered, trying to sidestep him. But he didn't move. Instead, he fixed me with that unsettling smile again. "Long drive ahead of you?" he asked. I nodded, not wanting to engage, but not wanting to be rude either. "Yeah, heading to California." "California," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Long way from here. You traveling alone?" A chill ran down my spine. I thought of Megan, alone in the car. "No," I said firmly. "My girlfriend's waiting for me. We should get going." He held up his hands, still smiling. Of course. Drive safe now." Wanting to startle her, no response. She must have fallen into a deep sleep. I tried the handle. Locked, just as I'd asked her to do. "Good girl, Megan," I called, knocking a little louder. "I'm back. Can you unlock the door?" Still no movement from inside the car. Concern started to creep in, replacing the unease from earlier. I knocked harder, my knuckles rapping sharply against the glass. "Megan, wake up!" Nothing. My heart began to race. I pressed my face against the window, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the glare from the overhead lights. The car was empty. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. I'd only been gone for a few minutes. Where could she have gone? I ran back to the rest stop building, bursting through the doors. The man I'd encountered earlier was nowhere to be seen. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Is anyone here? I need help." Silence was my only answer. I sprinted to the women's restroom, ignoring the sign as I pushed open the door. "Megan," I called, my voice cracking. "Are you in here?" Each stall stood empty, mocking me with their silence. Back outside, I circled our car, looking for any sign of where Megan might have gone. That's when I noticed it. A small scrap of fabric caught on the door handle. I recognized it immediately. It was from the sweater Megan had been wearing. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a practical joke gone wrong. Something had happened to Megan. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My girlfriend, I gasped, struggling to keep my voice steady. She's missing. We're at a rest stop on Highway 40, about 50 miles east of Flagstaff. I went inside for just a few minutes, and when I came back, she was gone. The dispatcher's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the panic coursing through me. Sir, I need you to take a deep breath. Can you give me a description of your girlfriend? I rattled off Megan's details. 56, long brown hair, green eyes, last seen wearing jeans and a blue sweater. As I spoke, my eyes scanned the parking lot, desperately hoping to see her walking back from somewhere, anywhere. We're dispatching officers to your location now, the dispatcher assured me. They should be there within 20 minutes. In the meantime, don't touch anything in or around your vehicle. It could be important evidence. Evidence. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. This was real. This was happening. I paced the parking lot, my mind racing through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Had Megan left voluntarily? No, that was impossible. We were happy, excited about our new life together, and she wouldn't have left without her phone or purse, both still sitting in the car where she'd left them. Expecting to wake up to find this was all some horrible nightmare brought on by too many hours on the road and too much gas station coffee. But the way of approaching sirens told me this was all too real. 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, their lights painting the scene and alternating flashes of red and blue as the officers approached. I found myself struggling to breathe. Saying it out loud would make it real. "Are you the one who called about a missing person?" one of the officers asked, his face a mask of professional concern. I nodded, swallowing hard. "My girlfriend Megan. She was in the car when I went inside. When I came back, she was gone." The officer nodded, jotting notes in a small pad. "And you're sure she didn't just step out for some air?" "She would have told me," I insisted. "And her things are still in the car. Something's wrong, I know it." As the officers began their investigation, searching the area and questioning the few other people at the rest stop, I stood by helplessly. The man I'd seen was nowhere to be found. Hours passed in a blur of questions, phone calls, and growing dread as the first light of dawn began to streak the sky. The harsh reality began to set in. Megan was gone, vanished into the night as if she'd never existed. The rest stop, once just another anonymous waypoint on our journey, had become the centerpiece of a nightmare. Every shadow held a potential clue, every stranger a possible suspect. As I watched the sun rise over the desert, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot, I was struck by a chilling thought. Our road trip, meant to be the beginning of our new life together, had instead become the start of a very different journey, one that I feared might never end. The harsh glare of the rest stop lights gave way to the soft glow of morning, but the shadows of that night would linger far longer. In the space of a few minutes, my world had been turned upside down. The open road, once a symbol of freedom and possibility, now stretched before me like an endless question mark. Where was Megan? What had happened in those few short minutes I was away? And most terrifyingly, would I ever see her again? As the investigation began in earnest, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't rest until I found the answers, no matter how dark the truth might be. Our journey had taken an unexpected and horrifying detour, and I was now embarking on the most important trip of my life, the search for Megan, and for the truth behind that fateful night at the rest stop. The Caribbean sun beat down on the pristine deck of the Oceanic Dream, but I couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep in my bones. 5 days into what should have been the vacation of a lifetime, and all I could think about was the empty cabin next door, and the growing knot of dread in my stomach. Something was very wrong on this ship, and I was beginning to fear I might be the only one who noticed. My name is Emily Chen, 34, a typically overworked software engineer from Seattle. Supposed to be my reward for closing a major project. 7 days of tropical bliss, fruity drinks, and blessed disconnection from the digital world. Now on day 5, I found myself wishing desperately for my laptop and access to any scrap of information that might explain what was happening. It had started innocuously enough on the 2nd day of the cruise. I noticed I hadn't seen my cabin neighbor since we'd left port. We chatted briefly during the muster drill. Her name was Sarah. She was traveling alone, celebrating her 40th birthday. She'd seemed excited about the trip, eager to try every activity the ship offered. But after that first day, nothing. No sign of her at the pool, the restaurants, or any of the nightly shows. At first, I chalked it up to different schedules. Maybe she was an early riser, hitting the gym while I slept in. Or perhaps she was nursing a wicked sunburn and staying in her cabin. It wasn't until the 3rd day that I really started to worry. I'd knocked on her door, intending to invite her to that night's comedy show. No answer. I tried again later that evening. Still nothing. On day 4, I approached the guest services desk. The young man behind the counter, his name tag read Aiden, smiled blandly as I explained my concerns. "I'm sure your neighbor's fine, ma'am," he said, his tone just a touch too rehearsed. "Some guests prefer to keep to themselves. Perhaps she's enjoying room service in a view from her balcony." I pressed further. "Could you at least check if she's been using her room key or if she's ordered any room service?" Aiden's smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. Fear, annoyance. "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information, ma'am. Passenger privacy, you understand. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" I left the desk feeling unsettled. Aiden's reaction seemed off, somehow too polished, too dismissive. That night, I lay awake in my cabin, straining to hear any sound from next door. The walls on these ships were thin. I should have been able to hear something, a TV, footsteps, the shower running, but there was only silence. As I tossed and turned, a new thought occurred to me. I hadn't just not seen Sarah. I couldn't remember seeing several of the passengers I'd noticed earlier in the cruise. The elderly couple who'd sat next to me at the captain's dinner. The rowdy group of college kids who'd been making a splash at the pool bar. Sleep eluded me as my mind raced through possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. By the time the first light of dawn crept through my window, I'd worked myself into a state of near panic. I spent day 5 watching, really watching. I positioned myself in the ship's main atrium, a book in my hand as camouflage, and observed the ebb and flow of passengers and crew. That's when I started to notice the patterns. Crew members speaking in hushed tones, their eyes stuck darting nervously, certain areas of the ship being quietly cordoned off, passengers redirected with vague excuses about routine maintenance, and the passengers themselves, there seemed to be fewer of them. The ship didn't feel empty exactly, but less full than it had at the start of the cruise. Spaces that had been crowded now had room to breathe. Lines that had been long now moved quickly. As the day wore on, my unease grew. I caught snippets of conversation, other passengers voicing concerns similar to mine, but each time a crew member would appear as if by magic, smoothly changing the subject or offering a free drink to distract from the questions. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I made my way back to the guest services desk, determined to push harder this time. But as I approached, I saw Aiden in deep conversation with a man I recognized as one of the ship's security officers. Their expressions were grave. I slowed my pace, trying to catch what they were saying without being obvious. "Can't keep this contained much longer," Aiden was saying. his usual polished demeanor nowhere in sight. People are starting to notice the security officer. Nodded grimly. I know we're doing everything we can, but if we don't find a solution soon. He trailed off as he noticed me approaching. In an instant, both men's faces transformed, pleasant smiles replacing the worry I'd just witnessed. "Good evening, ma'am," Aiden said brightly. "How can we help you today?" I hesitated, my prepared speech dying on my lips. The change in their demeanor had been so abrupt, so complete, that for a moment I doubted what I'd just seen and heard. I was just wondering about tonight's entertainment schedule," I stammered, hating myself for chickening out as Aiden rattled off the evening's activities. My mind was elsewhere. What couldn't they keep contained? What solution were they looking for? And most importantly, what did it have to do with the missing passengers? I thanked them and walked away, my head spinning. I needed to think, to plan my next move. I made my way to the top deck, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The night was beautiful, the kind of perfect tropical evening you see in travel brochures. Stars glittered overhead, and a warm breeze carried the faint scent of salt and flowers. In any other circumstance, it would have been paradise. I leaned against the railing, looking out over the dark water. The ship's wake stretched behind us, a glowing path leading back to what? What had we left behind? What were we sailing into? A sound behind me made me turn. A woman was approaching, her face pale in the moonlight. As she drew closer, I recognized. We stood in silence, both of us staring out at the endless expanse of ocean. "Have you noticed," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "that people seem to be disappearing?" My heart raced, so I wasn't the only one. "Yes," I breathed, "my cabin neighbor. I haven't seen her in days." The woman, Lisa, I remembered, now turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. "My husband," she said, "he went to get ice last night and never came back. When I asked at guest services, they told me he'd been taken to the infirmary with a bad case of seasickness, but when I went to check on him, they wouldn't let me in. Said it was quarantined due to a possible norovirus outbreak." A chill ran down my spine. "Did you believe them?" Lisa shook her head slowly. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know something's not right on this ship." As if on cue, a scream pierced the night air. Lisa and I both jumped, spinning toward the sound. It had come from the deck below us. We raced to the stairs, our hearts pounding as we reached the lower deck. We saw a small crowd gathering near the ship's railing. Pushing our way through, we reached the front just in time to see a crew member pulling someone back over the railing. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She was sobbing hysterically, fighting against the crew member's grip. "Let me go," she screamed. "I have to get off this ship. They're not human." The crowd murmured uneasily. An older man in a ship's officer uniform pushed through, immediately taking charge of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your cabins," he said, his voice calm but brooking no argument. "This young lady is simply suffering from too much sun and alcohol. We'll take good care of her." But as they led the still struggling woman away, I caught her eye. There was no sign of intoxication there, only raw, primal fear. Lisa gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Did you hear what she said?" she whispered. "They're not human." What did she mean? I shook my head, unable to form words. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what we just witnessed. The missing passengers, the crew's strange behavior, and now this. It was too much to be coincidence. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Lisa and I remained rooted to the spot. The beautiful night suddenly felt sinister, the gentle rocking of the ship no longer soothing but menacing. "What do we do now?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "We find out the truth," I said, surprised by the determination in my own voice. "Whatever happening on this ship, we need to uncover it before we disappear too." As we made our way back to our cabins, planning our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we just crossed a line. The carefree vacation was over. We were now in uncharted waters, sailing into a mystery deeper and darker than the ocean beneath us. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered a terrifying question. Known this in some abstract way, but as I stood there, surrounded by ancient trees and an unnatural silence, I felt it in my bones. Something was watching me. And it wasn't the typical woodland creatures I'd encountered on countless hikes before. This was different. This was wrong. My name is Jack Harper, and I've been an avid hiker for most of my 35 years. I'd tackled some of the most challenging trails across the country, from the Appalachian Trail to the Pacific Crest. But nothing in my experience had prepared me for what I encountered in the depths of the Cascade Mountains that fateful autumn day. It started as a routine solo hike. I'd mapped out a 3-day trek through a remote area, eager to test a new ultralight gear setup I'd been piecing together. The weather was perfect, crisp and clear, with just a hint of the coming winter in the air. The first day went smoothly. I made good time, covering more ground than I'd planned. As the sun began to set, I found a small clearing to set up camp that night. As I lay in my tent, listening to the familiar sounds of the forest, I felt completely at peace. The trouble began on the second day. I broke camp early, eager to get moving while the morning mist still clung to the trees. The trail started to get steeper, winding its way up the mountain through increasingly dense forest. The trees here were old, really old. Their massive trunks were covered in thick moss, and their branches twisted in ways that sometimes made them look almost human. It was around midday when I first noticed the markings. At first I thought it was just an unusual pattern in the bark of one of the trees. But as I looked closer, I realized it was definitely man-made. A series of intricate symbols had been carved into the trunk, the cut still fresh enough that sap was seeping from them. I frowned, pulling out my phone to take a picture. Vandalism on the trail always irritated me, but this was different. The symbols didn't look like the usual graffiti or initials you sometimes see. They were complex, almost like some sort of writing system I'd never seen before. As I continued up the trail, I spotted more of the symbols. They appeared at irregular intervals, always carved into the largest, oldest trees. My unease grew with each new discovery. Who had done this, and why? It was late afternoon when I realized I was lost. I'd been so focused on the strange symbols that I hadn't been paying close attention to the trail. Now, as I tried to get my bearings, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen a proper trail marker. I pulled out my map and compass, trying to orient myself, but something was wrong. The compass needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on a direction. I shook it, tapped it, but nothing helped. But a tendril of fear began to curl in my stomach. I'd never had my compass fail on me before. I reached for my phone, hoping to use the GPS, but there was no signal. Of course, the light was starting to fade, the shadows lengthening around me. I knew at night in the morning I told myself I'd be able to backtrack and find the trail again. I picked a direction that looked promising and started walking. That's when I noticed the silence. In all my years of hiking, I'd never experienced anything like it. There were no bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to have died, leaving the forest in an eerie stillness. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of those strange symbols out of the corner of my eye. Just as I was about to give up and make camp, wherever I was, I stumbled into a small clearing in the center. Stood a massive tree, easily the largest I'd seen yet. Its trunk was covered in the symbols, more densely packed than any I'd seen before, but it wasn't the symbols that made me freeze in my tracks. It was the door, set into the trunk of the tree. It was a wooden door, ornately carved with the same symbols that I'd been seeing all day. It looked ancient, the wood weathered and stained, but it was undeniably a door. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be real. Doors didn't just appear in trees in the middle of nowhere. I reached out, half expecting my hand to pass right through it. Instead, my fingers touched solid wood. The door was real. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe some external force guiding my actions. But before I could think better of it, I grasped the handle and turned. The door opened with a low creak that seemed to echo through the silent forest. Beyond it was darkness, a blackness so complete it seemed to swallow the light. I stood there frozen, staring into the void. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this impossible door as I could, but something held me in place. A whisper so faint I wasn't sure if I was really hearing it or just imagining it. It was calling my name. Jack. I took a step back, finally breaking free of whatever spell had held me. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That's when I heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting coming from somewhere deep in the forest. It started softly, barely audible, but grew steadily louder. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the sound, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, surrounding me. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, words in a language I didn't recognize, repeating over and over, and underneath it all I could still hear my name, whispered like a promise or a threat. Panic overwhelmed me. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, no longer caring about finding the trail or preserving the environment. All that mattered was getting away from that clearing, from that door, from the chanting that seemed to follow me, no matter how far or fast I ran. Branches whipped at my face. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I kept running, driven by a fear more primal than anything I'd ever meaning in that dark, twisted forest, but eventually my legs gave out and I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air as I lay there trying to catch my breath. I realized the chanting had stopped. The forest was silent once more. But it wasn't the unnatural silence from before. I could hear the wind in the trees, the call of a distant owl. I pushed myself up, looking around the trees. Here seemed normal. No twisted branches or carved symbols in sight. Had I imagined it all? But as I stood, something crunched under my foot. I looked down and felt my blood run cold. There, half buried in the leaves, was a small wooden token. Carved into its surface was one of the symbols I'd seen on the trees. It was real. All of it. With shaking hands, I picked up the token and shoved it into my pocket. I needed proof. Something to show that I hadn't lost my mind out here in the wilderness. The sky was lightening, the first hints of dawn breaking through the canopy. I'd been running all night. In the growing light, I spotted a trail marker. Somehow, impossibly, I'd found my way back to the main trail. I didn't stop to rest, ignoring the protests of my battered body. I started down the trail at the fastest pace I could manage. I needed to get back to civilization, back to a world that made sense. It took me most of the day, but I finally reached the trailhead where I'd parked my car. As I drove away, my hand shaking on the steering wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brushed up against something ancient and dangerous, something that wasn't meant for human eyes. I've been home for a week now, trying to make sense of what happened. I've researched the symbols, reached out to linguists and historians, but found nothing. The wooden token sits on my desk, a constant reminder that it wasn't all in my head. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear it, that whisper calling my name, and in my dreams, I see that door standing open in the heart of the forest, waiting for me to step through. I know I should forget about it, chalk it up to an unexplainable experience and move on, but I can't. The mystery of what lies beyond that door consumes my thoughts, and deep down in a place I'm barely willing to acknowledge, I know I'll go back. The forest is calling, and sooner or later, I'll have to answer. Because the truth is, I left something behind in those woods. Something more important than any gear or supplies. I left a piece of myself, and I have a feeling the forest won't rest until I come to reclaim it. So sharing the symbol system, I probably try to find out spot when your disagrees. I feel like deeps create, the symbol created out. The first rays of dawn crept over the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across our campsite. As the light touched our shredded tent and scattered supplies, the full extent of the night's devastation became clear. But it wasn't the destruction that chilled me to the bone. It was the massive, unidentifiable footprints leading away from our camp. Whatever had visited us in the night was still out there, and we were about to follow its trail. My name is Mike Sullivan. Turned into something straight out of a nightmare. We'd been planning this trip for months, eager to escape the grind of our corporate jobs and reconnect with nature. Both of us were experienced campers, but nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered in the remote wilderness of the Cascade Mountains. We'd arrived at the trailhead Friday afternoon, our packs loaded with enough supplies for 3 days. The hike in was challenging, but exhilarating. By the time we reached our intended campsite, a small clearing near a bubbling stream, we were tired but in high spirits. "Man, I needed this," Dave said as we set up our tent. No emails, no deadlines, just us and the great outdoors. I nodded in agreement, taking a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. "It's perfect. Let's get a fire going and crack open those beers we packed." In the evening passed pleasantly. We grilled hot dogs over the fire, shared stories, and marveled at the blanket of stars overhead. It felt like we were the only two people in the world as we settled into our sleeping bags. The forest around us came alive with nocturnal sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. It was soothing, and I drifted off to sleep, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. I'm not sure what woke me. Maybe it was a sudden silence, the absence of those nighttime noises, or maybe it was some primal instinct sensing a predator nearby. Whatever it was, I found myself wide awake in the pitch darkness of our tent. "Dave," I whispered, reaching out to shake my friend's shoulder. "Dave, wake up." He stirred, grumbling. What time is it?" "Shh," I hissed. "Listen." We both fell silent, straining our ears. At first, there was nothing. Then we heard it, heavy footsteps circling our campsite. They were slow, deliberate, like whatever was out there was searching for something. Dave's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing tight. Neither of us dared to breathe. The footsteps stopped right outside our tent. I could hear deep rumbling breaths like a large animal. Scenting the air, the thin fabric of our tent seemed laughably inadequate protection. Suddenly, a low growl vibrated through the air. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not a mountain lion. It was deeper, almost guttural, and it radiated a terrifying intelligence. Without warning, our tent was ripped away, the poles snapping like twigs. Dave and I scrambled out of our sleeping bags, our hearts pounding so hard I thought they might burst. In the faint moonlight, I caught a glimpse of our attacker. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur, but it wasn't a bear, standing on its hind legs. Its proportions were all wrong, too humanoid, and its eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Dave's arm and pulling him towards the trees. We crashed through the underbrush, blind with terror behind us. I could hear the creature giving chase, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like jelly. Finally, we collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping for air. What was that thing?" Dave panted. I shook my head, unable to form words. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. We huddled there for what felt like hours, jumping at every sound, but the creature, whatever it was, didn't seem to have followed us. As the sky began to lighten, we cautiously made our way back to our campsite. The scene that greeted us was one of complete devastation. Our tent was in tatters, our supplies scattered everywhere. Deep claw marks scored the nearby trees, and there, in the soft earth, were the footprints, enormous, with 5 distinct toes. They were unmistakably hominid in shape, but no human could have left prints that large. Dave and I looked at each other, the same thought mirrored in our eyes. We should leave. We should get the hell out of these mountains and never look back. But curiosity, that damnable human trait, began to overtake our fear. We should follow them, Dave said quietly. I wanted to argue, to insist we head back to civilization. But a part of me, a part I wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging, wanted to know more. So we gathered what supplies we could salvage and set off, following the trail of massive footprints. The tracks led us deeper into the forest, up steep inclines and through dense underbrush. Whatever had made them was strong, pushing through areas that gave us significant trouble. As we hiked, the forest around us seemed to change. The trees grew larger, older, their branches twisting in unnatural ways. The underbrush became thicker, dotted with plants I didn't recognize. "Mike!" Dave called out, his voice tight with tension. "Look at this!" He was pointing at one of the trees. Carved into its bark was a strange symbol, a complex swirl of lines that hurt my eyes if I looked at it too long. "What is it?" I asked, reaching out to touch the carving. Dave shook his head. "I don't know, but look, it's on other trees too." He was right. Now that I'd seen one, I noticed the symbols were everywhere, carved into the largest and oldest trees. We pressed on, the trail of footprints, leading us ever deeper into the strange, twisted version of the forest. The air grew thick and heavy, and an unnatural silence fell over everything. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was as if we'd stepped into another world entirely. As the day wore on, exhaustion began to set in. We'd been hiking for hours, with no sign of our quarry. Just as I was about to suggest we turn back, we emerged into a clearing. In the center stood an enormous tree, easily the largest I'd ever seen. Its trunk was covered in those strange symbols, carved so densely they overlapped, and at its base was a cave-like opening, the entrance partially obscured by gnarled roots. Dave and I exchanged glances. The footprints led direct. "Dark opening we should go in?" Dave said, his voice barely above a whisper. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I found myself nodding, pulled forward by a curiosity I couldn't explain. We clicked on our flashlights and entered the cave. The air inside was cool and damp, with an oud, musky scent that tickled my nose. Our lights revealed rough stone walls covered in more of those strange symbols, these painted rather than carved. We moved deeper into the cave, our footsteps echoing softly. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading us further underground. Just as I was starting to worry we'd get lost, we emerged into a large cavern. Our flashlights couldn't penetrate the full extent of the space, but what they revealed made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in crude paintings depicting massive, fur-covered figures alongside much smaller human shapes. Some scenes showed hunts, others seemed to be some sort of ritual. But it was what stood in the center of the cavern that truly terrified me. A crude altar of piled stones, stained dark with what I prayed wasn't blood, and arranged around it, carefully placed, were human skulls. "We need to leave," I choked out, grabbing Dave's arm. Now he nodded, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. We turned to go, only to find our exit blocked. The creature from our campsite stood there, its massive form filling the tunnel. In the light of our flashlights, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was like a bizarre amalgamation of man and beast, covered in thick, matted fur, with a face that was almost, but not quite human, and its eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakable. It regarded us for a long moment, then let out a low, rumbling sound. To my shock, I realized it was trying to speak. "You come!" It growled, the words barely recognizable. Dave and I looked at each other, terror and amazement wearing on our faces. We'd come looking for answers, and now we were faced with something beyond our wildest imaginations. The creature turned, gesturing for us to follow, and despite every rational thought screaming at me to run, I found myself taking a step forward, because in that moment I realized we were on the brink of a discovery that would change everything. As we followed the creature deeper into the cave system, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd crossed a threshold. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. We'd ventured into the domain of something ancient and unknown, and we were about to learn secrets that had been hidden from humanity for millennia. The weekend camping trip was long forgotten. We were now on a journey into the heart of a mystery, one that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the places. The world and our place in it, and as the darkness of the cave swallowed us, I couldn't help but wonder, were we discoverers on the brink of a revolutionary finding, or being led deeper into a predator lair? Only time would tell, and the answers I feared might come at a cost higher than we were prepared to pay. The endless ribbon of asphalt stretched out before me, disappearing into the inky darkness of the desert night. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating nothing but empty road in the occasional scrub brush. It was just another night haul or so, I thought. Little did I know that the next few hours would become the longest and most terrifying of my 15-year career as a long-haul trucker. My name's Joe Hawkins, and I've been driving big rigs across the country since I was old enough to get my commercial license. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff out on the road. You don't drive the midnight hours without collecting a few stories. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that night on Route 50 in Nevada. It started around 2 a.m. I'd been on the road for about 6 hours, making good time on a run from Salt Lake City to Sacramento. The cab of my Peterbilt was quiet, except for the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the CB radio. I was settling into that zen-like state that long-haul drivers know well, not quite asleep but not fully awake either. Just me, the road, and miles of desert darkness. That's when I first noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first I didn't think much of it. Other vehicles aren't uncommon even at this hour. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized something wasn't quite right. The car behind me was keeping pace perfectly, maintaining the exact same distance, no matter how I varied my speed. I clicked on my CB, thinking maybe it was another trucker playing Games Breaker 1N, This Is Lone Wolf. Anyone out there following me over silence? Not even static. I frowned. Checking my mirrors again, the headlights were still there, unwavering. Probably just some tourist who's nervous about passing a big rig in the dark, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the growing unease. But as the next hour crawled by, the car remained fixed behind me. I tried speeding up, slowing down, even pulling over at a rest stop. Each time, the mysterious vehicle mirrored my actions perfectly. At the rest stop, I'd hop to get a look at who was driving, but the car stopped just out of sight in the darkness beyond the reach of the floodlights. As soon as I pulled back onto the highway, it was right there behind me again. By now, my palms were sweating on the steering wheel. This wasn't normal behavior, not by a long shot. I tried the CB again, this time on multiple channels. Nothing. But dead air. That's when things got really weird. We were passing through a particularly desolate stretch of desert when suddenly the headlights behind me winked out. I felt a moment of relief, thinking maybe whoever it was had finally turned off. But then, to my horror, I saw headlights appear in my side mirror. The car was now driving alongside my truck, keeping perfect pace. My heart pounding, I glanced over, trying to get a look at the driver, but the windows were tinted so dark, they looked like black mirrors reflecting the starry desert sky. "What the hell do you want?" I shouted, knowing they couldn't hear me, but unable to keep quiet any longer. As if in response, the car suddenly accelerated, pulling in front of my truck. For the first time, I got a good look at it. It was an old model, maybe from the 70s, with sleek lines that didn't quite match any make or model I could recall, and it was black. Not just dark-colored, but a black so deep it seemed to swallow the light from my headlights. Now I was really starting to freak out. I grabbed the CV mic again. "Mayday! Mayday! This is truck driver Joe Hawkins on Route 50 mile marker 257. I've got a vehicle harassing me. Does anyone copy?" The radio crackled to life, and for a split second, I felt a wave of relief. But what came through wasn't a response. It was a sound that made my blood run cold. A low rhythmic humming punctuated by what sounded like words in a language I'd never heard before. The strange broadcast continued for several seconds, then cut off abruptly. In the silence that followed, I became acutely aware of a new sound, a high-pitched whine coming from the black car in front of me. As I watched, dumbfounded, the rear of the car began to change. It was like the metal was flowing, reshaping itself. What emerged looked like some kind of mechanical arm reaching back towards my truck. "Oh, hell no!" I yelled, finally snapping out of my shocked stupor. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest as I brought 40 tons of steel to a rapid halt. The black car shot forward, its strange appendage grasping at empty air where my truck had been moments before. It skidded to a stop about 100 yards ahead, its form seeming to ripple and shift in the glow of my headlights. For a moment, everything was still. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white, staring at the motionless vehicle ahead. My mind was reeling, unable to process what I'd just seen. Then slowly, the driver's door of the black car opened. A figure emerged, and I felt the last shreds of rational explanation slip away. It was humanoid in shape, but too tall, too thin to be human. Its movements were fluid, yet somehow wrong, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. As it turned towards me, I caught a glimpse of its face, or rather, where a face should have been. There were no features, just a smooth, reflective surface, like polished obsidian. I didn't consciously decide to act. Pure instinct took over. I threw my truck into reverse, tires spinning as I backed away as fast as I dared. The figure began to walk towards me, its gait unnaturally smooth and fast. I shifted back into drive and swerved around, thinking whatever gods might be listening that the highway was empty. I floored it, pushing my rig to speeds it was never designed for. In my mirrors, I could see the black car, pursuing, gaining on me with impossible speed. My CB crackled to life again, that strange humming and alien speech pouring out of the speakers. I ripped the mic from its cradle and threw it on the floor, but the sound continued. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The black car was right behind me now. I could see that mechanical arm reaching out again, grasping for my trailer. My speedometer was buried, the engine screaming in protest, but it wasn't enough. Just as I felt certain I was done for, I saw something ahead that filled me with wild hope. The lights of a town. I'd completely lost track of where I was, but right then, I didn't care. Civilization meant people, witnesses, help. I laid on the horn as I barreled into the outskirts of the small desert town, praying that someone, anyone, would see what was happening. As I screeched around a corner, I chanced a glance in my mirror. The black car was gone. I slammed on the brakes, my truck sliding to a stop in front of what looked like a small diner. A few startled patrons peered out the windows at the commotion. For a long moment, I just sat there, gasping for breath, waiting for the black car to reappear. But it didn't come. The street behind me was empty, quiet, except for the ticking of my cooling engine. On shaky legs, I climbed down from the cab. A couple of people had come out of the diner looking concerned. "You all right, buddy?" one of them asked. "You came in here like a bat out of hell." I opened my mouth to explain, but where would I even begin? Who would believe me? I thought something was wrong with my brakes, I lied. Guess I panicked a bit. Sorry for the scare. As the small crowd dispersed, their curiosity satisfied, I leaned against my truck, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been some kind of hallucination? A waking nightmare brought on by too many hours on the road? But then I saw it on the side of my trailer. Right where that mechanical arm had been reaching was a perfect handprint. Not a human handprint, but something with too many fingers, pressed so deeply into the metal it looked like it had been made in soft clay. I stared at it, my mind reeling. There would be no explaining this away, no pretending it was all in my head. Whatever had been chasing me out there in the desert night was real, and somehow I knew with chilling certainty it wasn't finished with me.
Lonely highways I'd traveled for years were no longer just empty stretches of asphalt. They were hunting grounds. And something was out there watching and waiting for unwary travelers like me. The open road, once my sanctuary, had become a place of terror. And as I pulled out of that small town, heading towards the coming dawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that my nightmare was far from over. It was only just beginning. The shutter clicked, freezing the moment in digital eternity. I lowered my camera, squinting at the LCD screen to reissue the shot. That's when I saw it, a blur in the background, something large moving through the trees. My heart raced as I zoomed in the pixelated image, resolving into a shape that defied explanation. In that instant, I knew my life would never be the same. My name is Alex Chen, and until that moment, I was just another wildlife photographer chasing the perfect shot. At 32, I'd built a decent reputation, capturing images of North America's more elusive creatures. Wolves in Yellowstone, mountain lions in the Rockies, bears in Alaska. But nothing in my experience could have prepared me for what I encountered in the remote forests of the Pacific Northwest. It all started 3 days ago. I'd heard rumors of unusually large wolf packs in this area, and I was determined to get the shot that would cement my reputation in the wildlife photography world. I'd hiked deep into the wilderness, far from any trails or campsites, carrying enough gear to last me a week. The first 2 days were frustrating, but uneventful. I'd seen signs of wolf activity, tracks, scatter, the remains of a deer carcass, but no actual wolves. As the sun set on the third day, I was starting to think this trip might be a bust. That's when I heard the howl. It echoed through the forest, sending a shiver down my spine. There was something off about it, too deep, too human, but I was too excited to pay much attention to my unease. I grabbed my camera and headed towards the sound, moving as quietly as I could through the underbrush. As I crept forward, the forest around me seemed to change. The trees grew larger, older, their branches twisting in ways that seemed almost deliberate. The undergrowth became denser, filled with plants I didn't recognize. An unnatural silence fell, broken only by the occasional snapping twig under my feet. Then I saw it, a clearing ahead, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. And there at the far edge was a massive, dark shape. My heart leapt. Could it be a wolf? It seemed too big, but maybe it was just a trick of the light. I raised my camera, zooming in as far as my lens would allow. Through the viewfinder, I could see the creature more clearly. It was covered in dark fur, all right, but its proportions were all wrong for a wolf. It stood on 2 legs, its back to me easily 7 or 8 feet tall. My face button, what was I? Looking at a bear, maybe? But even as I thought it, I knew that wasn't right. Its shape was too humanoid, its movements too deliberate. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed the button. The shutter clicked unnaturally loud. Out in the silent forest, the creature's head snapped around, and I found myself staring into eyes that were decidedly not animal. They gleamed with an intelligence that sent a chill through me. For a long moment we locked gazes, neither of us moving. Then it was gone, vanishing into the trees with a speed that bellied its size. I stood there frozen, my camera hanging limply from my hand. What had I just seen? My mind raced through possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. Bigfoot? Some undiscovered species of primate? A hoax? With shaking hands, I reviewed the photo on my camera's screen. There it was, a large, fur-covered figure, its face turned towards me. The image was slightly blurry due to the low light and the creature's sudden movement, but it was clear enough to see that this was something unknown to science. As the locations of what I'd captured began to sink in, a mix of excitement and fear washed over me. This could be the discovery of the century. My name would go down in history, but a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. There might be a reason this creature had remained hidden for so long. I barely slept that night, my dreams filled with glowing eyes and shadowy figures. As soon as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I was up, reviewing the photo again. Again, in the harsh light of day, doubt began to creep in. Could I have imagined it? Mistaken a bear or some other known animal for something more fantastic? But no, the photo was there, undeniable proof that I'd seen something extraordinary. I packed up my camp, my mind made up. I needed to find it again to get clearer photos, maybe even some video. The world needed to know about this. I spent the day tracking, using all the skills I'd honed over years of wildlife photography. But this was different from tracking any animal I'd encountered before. The signs were subtle, a bent branch here, an unusually large footprint there, and always I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the one being watched. As the day wore on, the forest seemed to grow denser, darker. The trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwining to block out much of the sunlight. I checked my GPS, frowning at the screen. According to this, I was miles from where I thought I was, in a part of the forest that didn't match any of my maps. Just as I was considering turning back, I heard it. That same deep, almost human howl from the night before. It was closer this time, much closer. My heart raced as I moved towards the sound, my camera at the ready. I pushed through a thick patch of ferns and found myself in another clearing, but this one was different. Stone monoliths stood in a rough circle, each covered in strange swirling symbols that seemed to shift if I looked at them too long. And there in the center of the circle stood the creature in the full light of day. I could see it clearly. It was like something out of a myth, part man, part beast, covered in thick, dark fur. Its face was almost human, but with a pronounced brow and a mouth full of sharp teeth. Those intelligent eyes fixed on me, and I felt a jolt of recognition. It knew me. It had been waiting for me. My camera hung, forgotten, at my side as the creature took a step towards me. I should have been terrified, should have run, but something held me in place. There was a sense of ancientness about this being, of wisdom beyond human understanding. It raised a hand, not a paw, but a hand, with opposable thumbs, and pointed at my camera. The meaning was clear. It wanted me to take its picture. With shaking hands, I raised my camera and began to shoot. The creature posed, turning this way and that, showing itself from all angles. It was like the most surreal photo shoot of my life. As I lowered the camera, the creature nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then it began to change its form, shimmered like haze on a hot roe, and suddenly I was looking at myself, an exact copy down to the mud on my boots and the scratch on my left hand from a thorn bush. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. The other me smiled, but it wasn't my smile. It was too wide, too knowing. It spoke, and though the voice was mine, the words were like nothing I'd ever heard, a language both ancient and alien. As it spoke, the symbols on the stone monoliths began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with its words. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The clearing seemed to spin, the trees blurring into a green whirlwind. I felt myself falling, but the ground never came. I woke with a start, my head pounding.
I was back in my tent, my camera beside me. For a moment, I thought it had all been a vivid dream, but when I checked my camera, the photos were there. The blurry shot from the first night and the clear, impossible images from the stone circle. As I stared at the photos, a chill ran down my spine. In every shot where the creature was looking at the camera, the face was mine. Not just similar, it was me, down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. What had I stumbled upon? What was the meaning of the stone circle, the strange symbols, and most disturbingly, what was the connection between this creature and myself? I packed up my gear with shaking hands, my mind racing. I knew I should alert the authorities, tell the world about what I discovered. This could change everything we thought we knew about evolution, about the history of our planet. But as I hoisted my backpack, a strange certainty settled over me. This wasn't for the world to know, not yet. There were secrets here, ancient and powerful, that weren't meant for human understanding. As I made my way out of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving a part of myself behind, or perhaps I was taking something with me, something old and wild and unknowable. One thing was certain.
Seemed bigger, stranger, filled with possibilities and dangers I'd never imagined. And somewhere out there, wearing my face, was a creature that held the answers to questions I was only beginning to formulate. My journey wasn't ending. It was only just beginning. The sound of laughter pierced the silence of the night, jolting me awake. For a split second, I smiled, thinking my daughter had snuck out of bed to play. Then reality crashed in. My blood ran cold as I realized two chilling facts. That laughter wasn't my child's, and it was coming from inside our house. My name is Sarah Anderson, and I'm a single mother to my 5-year-old daughter, Lily. We'd moved to this quiet suburban neighborhood 6 months ago, hoping for a fresh start after my divorce. Until tonight. Our biggest worry had been adjusting to our new life. Now, as I lay frozen in my bed, listening to that eerie laughter echoing through our home, I realized how naive I'd been to think we were safe. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m., the witching hour my grandmother used to call it. I'd always scoffed at such superstitions, but in that moment, I felt a primal fear that defied rational thought. The laughter came again, closer this time. It sounded like a child, but distorted, as if played through an old record player. My maternal instincts finally overcame my paralysis. I had to check on Lily. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floor. The hallway loomed before me, dark and menacing. I considered turning on a light, but decided against it. If there was an intruder, I didn't want to alert them to my presence. As I crept down the hall, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, pregnant with possibilities. I paused outside Lily's room, my hand on the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over Lily's bed. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it was empty, the covers thrown back. Where was she? Lily? I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. Sweetie, where are you? No response. I moved further into the room, checking under the bed and in the closet. Nothing. Nothing. The creak of a floorboard from downstairs. My heart pounding, I made my way to the top of the stairs. The ground floor was shrouded in darkness, but I could make out a faint glow coming from the living room. I descended the stairs slowly, cringing at every small noise. As I reached the bottom, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The front door was wide open, letting in the cool night air. Muddy footprints led from the entrance to the living room. The glow I'd seen was coming from Lily's favorite nightlight, the one shaped like a fairy. It usually stayed in her room. What was it doing down here? Approached the living room entrance. Every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, to get out of the house and call for help. But I couldn't leave. not without Lily. I peered around the corner and felt my heart stop. There, in the center of the room, sat Lily. She was cross-legged on the floor, her back to me, still wearing her favorite unicorn pajamas. Relief flooded through me for a moment, until I noticed she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was something in the dim light I could only make out a vague shape. It seemed to be about Lily's size, but its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head too large and misshapen. They appeared to be playing some sort of game, moving small objects between them. As I watched, frozen in horror and disbelief, Lily giggled. It was her laugh, the one I'd heard from my bedroom. But it sounded wrong somehow, too old, too knowing for my little girl. The thing across from her made a sound, then a horrible parody of Lily's laugh. It was the sound that had woken me. I realized with dawning terror I must have made a noise, a gasp or a whinder, because suddenly both Lily and the thing turned to look at me. Lily's face was blank, her eyes unfocused as if she were sleepwalking. But the other, in the faint glow of the nightlight, I saw its face clearly for the first time. It was like a child's crude attempt at sculpting a human face from clay. The features were all there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they were wrong. The eyes were too large, solid black orbs that reflected the nightlight's glow. The nose was just two gaping holes, and its mouth was stretched in a wide, toothy grin that split its face almost in half. "Mommy?" Lily said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Come play with us." The thing nodded its massive head, bobbing unnaturally. Its grin impossibly grew even wider. "Yes, Mommy," it said in a perfect imitation of Lily's voice. "Come play." I stood there, paralyzed with fear, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming. But the cool air from the open door on my skin, the smell of wet earth from the muddy footprints, the soft glow of the nightlight, it was all too vivid, too present to be a dream. "Lily," I managed to choke out. "Come here, baby. Come to Mommy." Lily didn't move. She just stared at me with those blank eyes. The thing, however, began to rise. It unfolded itself, limbs stretching to Lights in the room blazed to life. I blinked against the sudden brightness, my eyes struggling to adjust. As my vision cleared, I saw Lily standing by the light switch, her hand still raised. She looked confused, as if she'd just woken up. "Mommy?" she said, her voice small and scared. "What's happening? Why are we downstairs?" I looked around frantically. The thing was gone. The muddy footprints, the open front door, all of it had vanished. It was as if the last few minutes had never happened. I rushed to Lily, scooping her up in my arms and holding her tight. She felt real, solid, her small body warm against mine. I breathed in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling tears of relief sting my eyes. "It's okay, baby," I murmured, as much to myself as to her. "Everything's okay. You were just sleepwalking." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The image of that thing with its distorted face and impossible grin was burned into my memory. The sound of its laugh, the feel of its cold, damp skin under my hands. It had all been too real. I carried Lily back up to her room, my eyes darting to every shadow, every dark corner. As I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes.
Mommy,
She whispered.
who was that boy I was playing with?
A chill ran down my spine. What boy, sweetie? Lily yawned, her eyes already drooping with sleep.
The funny-looking boy. He said he wanted to be my friend. He said he'd come back to play again.
I sat there, stroking her hair, until she fell asleep, my mind reeling. What had happened tonight? What was that thing? And why had it come for Lily? Most importantly, would it return? As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I made a decision. We couldn't stay here. Whatever that thing was, it had found us. Once, it could find us again. I began to pack, throwing clothes and essentials into suitcases. We'd leave as soon as Lily woke up. I didn't know where we'd go, but anywhere had to be safer than here. As I zipped up the last suitcase, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror. For a split second, I saw it. That wide, unnatural grin. Those black eyes staring at me from the reflection. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. I turned back to the mirror. My own pale, terrified face stared back at me. But as I watched my reflections, lips curled into a grin that was not my own.
See you soon, Mommy,
it said in Lily voice. The mirror cracked, a spider web of fractures spreading from the center. I stumbled back, a scream caught in my throat. In that moment, I knew the truth. We could run, but it wouldn't matter. Whatever had to be alone up here. My name is Rachel Chen, and I'm a 28-year-old marketing executive at Pinnacle Advertising. I'd been burning the midnight oil trying to finish a crucial presentation for a new client. It wasn't unusual for me to be the last one in the office, but tonight felt different. The silence of the empty building had been comforting right up until that elevator dinged. I glanced at my watch. 11:47 p.m. The cleaning crew had left hours ago, and security did their rounds on the hour. No one should be coming up now. For a moment, I considered calling out, asking who was there, but something stopped me. An instinct, buried deep in my lizard brain, told me to stay quiet, to hide. I slowly stood up, trying not to let my chair creak. The open-plan office suddenly felt exposed. I needed to find a better vantage point, somewhere I could see without being seen. As quietly as I could, I made my way to the break room. It had a clear view of the elevator bank, but the lights were off. Providing some cover, I positioned myself behind the door, peering through the crack. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh. I held my breath, waiting to see who would step out, but no one did. The elevator car sat there, empty, and illuminated a bright rectangle in the dim hallway. I frowned. Had someone accidentally hit the button for our floor? But then, why hadn't the doors closed? Closed. Again. As I watched, the lights in the elevator began to flicker. Once, twice. Then, they went out completely. The elevator was now a dark void. A mouth opened wide in the wall. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't right. I should leave, take the stairs down, and get out of the building. But curiosity, that damnable human trait, kept me rooted to the spot. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the darkened elevator. In the dim light of the office, I could only make out a silhouette. It was tall, unnaturally so, its head nearly brushing the ceiling, and its proportions were off. The arms seemed too long, dangling well past where knees should be. The figure stood still for a moment, as if orienting itself.
Then, with a fluid motion that made my stomach churn, it turned its head. I couldn't see its face, but I felt with a certainty that defied logic that it was looking directly at me. I ducked back, pressing myself against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could hear it. I closed my eyes, silently praying that when I opened them, this would all be a dream, a hallucination brought on by too much caffeine and too little sleep. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. Relief flooded through me. For a split second before a new, more terrifying thought hit me. If it wasn't in the hallway, where was it? As if in answer, I heard a sound from the main office area. Footsteps, but not like... Part of my brain, the part not consumed by terror, knew that running would make noise, it would hear me, so I moved slowly, carefully. Each step, measured, and silent. I'd made it about halfway to the door when the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen, afraid that even breathing too loudly would give me away. Then I heard it. A soft sound, like someone slowly inhaling. It was close, too close. I turned my head, inch by agonizing inch, and saw it. The figure was standing at the end of the row of desks, not 10 feet from me. In the glow of a forgotten computer monitor, I could finally see its face, or rather, where its face should have been. The head was smooth, featureless, like an egg made of shadow. But as I watched, horrified, the surface began to ripple. Eyes opened. Not two, but dozens, blinking in unsynchronized patterns. A mouth formed, stretching impossibly wide, filled with teeth that looked razor sharp. "Rachel," it said in a voice that sounded like 100 whispers layered over each other. "We've been waiting for you." I ran, all thoughts of stealth forgotten. I sprinted for the stairwell door. Behind me, I heard a sound like fabric tearing, followed by rapid footsteps. I hit the door at full speed, nearly falling down the stairs in my haste. I took them 3 at a time, the sound of my pursuer echoing in the stairwell. 27 floors, it felt like an eternity. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but fear kept me moving. Always just behind me, I could hear it coming. I burst out of the stairwell into the lobby, startling the night security guard. "Call the police," I screamed, not slowing down as I headed for the main doors. I heard the guard shout something, but I didn't stop to listen. I ran out into the street, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. Only when I'd run several blocks did I dare to look back. The street behind me was empty, no sign of the thing from the elevator. I slowed to a stop, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. What had just happened? What was that thing? As my breathing steadied, doubt began to creep in. Had I imagined it all? Was this some kind of stress-induced hallucination? I looked up at the Pinnacle advertising building, its upper floors lost in the night sky as I watched. Lights began to flick on, floor by floor, starting from the lobby and working their way up. The night security guard must be checking the building then. Just as the lights reached the 27th floor, my floor, they all went out. The entire building went dark. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the lights on each floor began to come back on, but this time they started from the top. I watched, transfixed with horror, as the lights descended. 26th floor, 25th, 24th. Whatever was up there was making its way down. A car horn blared, snapping me out of my daze. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from there. As I ran, my phone buzzed. Pulled it out a text message from an unknown number. "See you tomorrow, Rachel. Don't be late." I nearly dropped the phone. How? How could it know my number? But I knew with a sickening certainty that I would go back tomorrow because whatever that thing was, it was now in my workplace, and if I didn't go back, it might come looking for me. I ran through the night, questions swirling in my mind. What was that creature? Why was it there? And most terrifyingly, what did it want with me? One thing was clear. My life had changed irrevocably.
The comfortable reality I'd known had been shattered, replaced by a world where monsters lurked in elevators and shadows had teeth. As I finally reached my apartment building, fumbling with my keys, a new thought struck me. If this thing could be in my office, could it be anywhere? Was any place truly safe? I locked my door, checking it twice, then sank to the floor, my back against the wall. Sleep was out of the question. All I could do was wait for dawn, and with it, the inevitable return to the office, because I knew, deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning. Whatever game this entity was playing, I was now an unwilling participant. And as the first light of morning began to creep through my windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Somewhere out there in the shadows between floors something was waiting. And tomorrow, ready or not, I would have to face it again. The floorboard creaked beneath my foot, and my heart leapt into my throat in the oppressive silence of the abandoned mansion. That small sound felt like a gunshot. I froze, flashlight beam fixed on the dusty hallway ahead, straining my ears for any sign that we'd been discovered. But the only sound was the ragged breathing of my two companions behind me. After a moment that felt like an eternity, I took another step forward. We'd come too far to turn back now, even as every instinct screamed at me to run. My name is Alex Reeves, and I'm what you might call an urban explorer. At least that's how I started out. These days, I'm not sure what to call myself. Maybe a fool, maybe a thrill seeker with a death wish, or maybe just someone who seemed too much to ever go back to a normal life. It all started 3 months ago when my best friend Danny showed me a video he'd found online. It was shaky footage of an old mansion on the outskirts of our city. The place had been abandoned for decades, the subject of countless local legends. But this video was different. It showed lights moving in the windows, shadows that didn't match any sourcing, and at the very end, just for a split second, a face in one of the upper windows, a face that wasn't human. Danny was convinced it was elaborate special effects, a viral marketing stunt for some new horror movie. But I wasn't so sure. There was something about that face, something that sent a chill down my spine every time I watched it. So we decided to check it out ourselves, Danny, me, and our other friend Sarah, who had a popular YouTube channel dedicated to debunking paranormal hoaxes. We figured a best-case scenario we'd get some cool footage for her channel. Worst case, we'd have a fun night exploring a creepy old house. We had no idea what we were really walking into. The mansion loomed before us, a crumbling Victorian monstrosity silhouetted against the night sky. Even from the outside, it was clear this place had once been grand. Now, with its peeling paint and boarded-up windows, it looked like something out of a nightmare. "Last chance to back out," Sarah whispered, her camera already rolling. Danny grinned, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes. "No way. We came here for answers, and we're going to get them," I nodded, trying to ignore the knot of dread in my stomach. "Let's do this." Getting inside was easier than we expected. One of the ground floor windows had already been pried open, the boards covering it removed as we climbed through. The musty smell of decay hit us like a wall. "God, it reeks in here," Danny muttered, pulling his shirt up over his nose. Sarah swept her camera around the room. "Looks like we're not the first ones to come snooping." She was right. The floor was covered in footprints clearly visible in the thick layer of dust. But something about them seemed off. Some were normal shoe prints, but others looked like no footprint I'd ever seen before. We made our way deeper into the house, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Every room told a story of faded grandeur and long abandonment. Moth-eaten curtains, furniture covered in sheets, paintings on the walls so coated in grime their subjects were unrecognizable. But there were other things too, things that didn't fit in one room. We found a circle of candles, the wax still soft as if they'd been lit recently. In another, strange symbols were carved into the floorboards, their edges fresh and clean against the weathered wood. "Okay, this is officially creepy," Sarah said, her usual skepticism faltering. That's when we heard it, a thump from somewhere above us,
followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. "Maybe it's just another explorer," Danny suggested, his voice barely above a whisper, but we all knew that couldn't be true. We hadn't seen any other cars on the long, overgrown driveway leading to the mansion, and those footsteps, they didn't sound quite right. Too heavy, too deliberate. "We should check it out," I said, surprising myself. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from this place as possible, but a larger part, the part that had always pushed me to explore abandoned places and seek out the unknown, was burning with curiosity. We made our way up the grand staircase. Once plush carpet, now threadbare beneath our feet. The upper floor was, if possible, even more unsettling than the ground level. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, doors lining both sides. And at the very end, a soft glow spilled out from beneath one of the doors. That's where we were heading now, inching our way down the hallway, every creak and groan of the old house setting our nerves on edge. As we neared the door, I could make out voices. They were too low to understand, but they didn't sound like any language I'd ever heard before. The cadence was all wrong, rising and falling in patterns that made my head spin if I listened too closely. We were just a few feet from the door when Sarah's camera beeped loudly, signaling a low battery. The voices inside the room immediately stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the door began to open.
Run!
I hissed, already turning back the way we'd come. We sprinted down the hallway, no longer caring about the noise we were making behind us. I heard something emerge from the room. Its footsteps were fast, too fast, gaining on us with inhuman speed. We flew down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. I chanced a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. A figure stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the glow from the room. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long and jointed in all the wrong places, and its face, where its face seen was just a swirling void, darker than the darkness around it. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, Danny tripped, sprawling across the floor. Sarah and I each grabbed an arm, hauling him to his feet, but we lost precious seconds. We could hear it coming down the stairs now, each step bringing it closer. We raced for the window we'd entered through, my lungs burning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Sarah went through first, then Danny. As I was climbing through, I felt something cold brush against my ankle. I kicked out wildly and heard a hiss of pain that sounded almost human. Then I was through, tumbling onto the overgrown lawn. We ran to the car, not stopping until we were inside with the doors locked, as Danny gunned the engine. I looked back at the mansion. There, in one of the upper windows, I saw it, the face from the video. But now I knew it wasn't a face at all, just a swirling mass of darkness that somehow radiated malevolence. We drove in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. It wasn't until we were miles away, the mansion long out of sight, that Sarah spoke. "My camera," she said, her voice shaking. "I dropped it when we were running. It's still in there." We all knew what that meant. Whatever footage she'd managed to capture of that thing was now lost. We had no proof of what we'd seen, what we'd experienced. But as I sat there, still trembling from our narrow escape, I realized that proof didn't matter. We knew what we'd seen, and somehow, I knew this wasn't over. Deep down, we knew the truth. There were things in this world that defied explanation. Things that lurked in the shadows of abandoned places, waiting for foolish explorers like us. We never spoke about that night to anyone else who would believe us. But sometimes, late at night, I find myself drawn to the window, staring out into the darkness, and I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in that crumbling mansion on the edge of town, something is staring back, waiting, watching. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that one day I'll have to go back. Because once you've glimpsed what lies beyond the veil of our ordinary world, you can never truly look away. The darkness calls, and sooner or later, you have to answer.
You. As I sit here writing this down, I can't help but wonder what will I find when I return to that mansion. And more terrifyingly, what will find me. The screech of metal on metal pierced the night as the subway car ground to an unexpected halt. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows across the faces of my fellow passengers. As I looked around the nearly empty car, a chill ran right down my spine. The stranger, who had been following me all week, was here. His dark eyes locked on mine, and we were trapped underground with no way out. My name is Mia Chen, and until a week ago, I was just another face in the crowd of New York City. A 28-year-old graphic designer, I'd moved here from a small Midwest town chasing big dreams. Now, as I sat frozen in my seat, I wondered if those dreams would be the death of me. It had started last Tuesday. I was on my usual morning commute, lost in thought about an upcoming project deadline. As I exited the subway at my stop, I felt eyes on me. You develop a sixth sense for that sort of thing in the city. I glanced around and caught sight of a man staring at me intently. He was unremarkable in appearance, average height, dark hair, nondescript clothing, but something about his gaze made my skin crawl. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the usual weirdness of city life, but the next morning he was there again, and the next, always on my train, always watching me. I tried varying my route, leaving at different times. It didn't matter. He was always there, a constant shadow in my peripheral vision. I never saw him outside the subway, but every time I entered a station, my heart would race until I spotted him. It was like some twisted game of hide and seek where I was always found. I'd considered going to the police, but what would I say? That a man was riding the same public transportation as me? That he looked at me? I had no proof he'd done anything. Just a gnawing feeling of dread that grew with each passing day, which brought me to tonight. I'd stayed late at work, hoping to avoid my usual train. As I'd entered the nearly empty subway car, my heart had sunk. There he was, sitting calmly, as if he'd been waiting for me. I'd taken a seat as far from him as possible, my hand clutching my phone, 911 pre-dialed. We'd gone 2 stops, in tense silence when the train had screeched to a halt. Now, as the shadows danced around us, I watched in horror as he slowly stood up. His movements were fluid, almost graceful as he made his way towards me. The few other passengers seemed oblivious to the tension, absorbed in their phones or dozing against the windows. "Hello, Mia," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "I think it's time we talked." My breath caught in my throat. How did he know my name? I hadn't spoken to him, hadn't even acknowledged his existence all week. "And who are you?" I managed to croak out, my finger hovering over the call button on my phone. "What do you want from me?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those remained cold, calculating. Who I am isn't important. What's important is who you are, Mia, or rather who you're going to become. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. This couldn't be happening. Any moment now, I'd wake up in my bed. This whole week, nothing but a bad dream. But the cold metal of the subway seat beneath me, the AC smell of the tunnel outside, the very real man standing before me, it was all too vivid to be a dream. "I don't understand," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. He sat down across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Of course you don't. Not yet, but you will. You see, Mia, you're special. You just don't know it yet." I shook my head, confusion and fear warring inside me. "I'm not special. I'm nobody. Just leave me alone, please." His eyes hardened. "You don't get to decide that, Mia. We've been watching you for a long time. We know what you're capable of. I glanced around the car suddenly, sure that the other passengers were in on it, that this was some elaborate setup. But they remained as disinterested as before. "Yes, he confirmed. "There are more of us than you can imagine, Mia. We have been guiding humanity from the shadows for millennia. And now, it's your turn to join us." I stood up abruptly, no longer caring if I appeared crazy to the other passengers. I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't want to. Just stay away from me. I moved to push past him, intending to pound on the driver's compartment door if I had to. But as I tried to step around him, his hand shot out, gripping my wrist with inhuman strength. "You don't have a choice, me," he said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "The process has already been having all week, the strange dreams, the moments when I swore I could hear other people's thoughts." "That's right," he said, as if reading my mind. Maybe he was. "Your abilities are awakening, but you need guidance. Training without us, you'll lose control. And trust me, you don't want that to happen." The lights in the subway car flickered again, and this time they stayed off. In the darkness, I felt something change in the air around us. It became charged, electric, and suddenly I could see everything. The thoughts of the other passengers flowed into my mind like water. The complex systems of the subway car laid themselves out before me like a 3D blueprint. And the man holding my wrist? I saw what he truly was. Not human, not even close. I recoiled, yanking my arm free with strength I didn't know I possessed. "What are you?" I gasped in the darkness. His eyes began to glow with an inner light. "We are the Watchers, Mia, the guardians of humanity's evolution, and you are the next step." The subway car lurched, the lights sputtering back to life as if a spell had been broken. The world snapped back into normal focus. The other passengers stirred, grumbling about the delay. The man, the Watcher, stood up. "This isn't over, Mia. We'll be in touch." And just like that, he was gone. Not through a door, not to another part of the car. He simply vanished. Between one blink and the next, the train started moving again, and I sank back into my seat, my mind reeling. What had just happened? What was happening to me? As we pulled into the next station, I stumbled out onto the platform, gulping in the stale subway air like it was the freshest mountain breeze. My phone buzzed in my pocket with shaking hands. I pulled it out, a text from an unknown number. "Welcome to the truth, Mia. Your training begins tomorrow." I stared at the screen, a mix of terror and excitement coursing through me. Part of me wanted to run, to hide, to pretend none of this was happening. But a larger part, a part that felt like it was waking up after a long sleep, was curious, eager. Even as I made my way up to the street, the city seemed different, brighter somehow, more alive. I could feel the pulse of millions of lives around me, a symphony of thoughts and emotions I'd never been aware of before. I looked up at the night sky, barely visible through the light pollution and skyscrapers. Somewhere up there, I knew the Watchers were looking down, waiting. And I had a choice to make. Did I run from this newfound power and the mysterious beings that came with it? Or did I embrace it? Step into a world I never knew existed? As I walked home, my mind swirling with possibilities, I realized the choice had already hung low over the ocean, casting a silvery path across the waves. It was supposed to be the perfect night for a midnight swim. Instead, as I treaded water, my blood ran cold. Something large and powerful had just brushed against my leg, and it definitely wasn't a fish. The peaceful lapping of waves suddenly seemed ominous, hiding whatever lurked beneath the surface, and then, without warning, my friend Mark disappeared under the water with a strangled cry. My name is Jeff, and what started as a carefree beach night with friends had just turned into a nightmare. We were 4 recent college grads, me, Mark, Zoe, and Tyler, celebrating our last summer of freedom before diving into the real-world bind of corporate jobs and adult responsibilities. We'd been camping on this secluded beach for 3 days, and tonight was supposed to be the grand finale of our trip. The day had been perfect. Sunshine, beach volleyball, and cold beers around bonfire as we watched the sunset. As night fell and the moon rose, someone, I think it was Tyler, had suggested a midnight swim. "Come on, guys," he'd said, already stripping down to his swim trunks. "When are we ever going to get a chance like this again?" Full moon, warm water, not another soul for miles. We'd all agreed. Caught up in the magic of the moment, Zoe and I had changed into our swimsuits, while Mark had just chucked off his shirt and jumped in wearing his shorts. We'd waited out until the water reached our chests, laughing and splashing each other like kids. That's when I'd felt it. Something solid and alive brushing past my leg. I'd frozen, my laughter dying in my throat. "Guys," I'd started to say, but Mark's sudden disappearance cut me off. Now, as the ripples from where he'd vanished spread outward, we all stared at each other in shock. "Mark," Zoe called out, her voice trembling. "Mark, this isn't funny." But we all knew this wasn't a joke. Mark was a strong swimmer, but he'd gone under so fast without even a splash. "We need to get out of the water," Tyler said, his usual bravado replaced by naked fear. Now we started swimming toward shore, our strokes frantic and uncoordinated. I could feel panic rising in my chest, threatening to overwhelm me. I forced it down, focusing on the rhythmic movement of my arms cutting through the water. We were about halfway to the beach when I heard Zoe scream. I turned to see her being pulled backward, her arms flailing. "Something's got my leg," she shrieked, terror distorting her features. Tyler and I swam towards her, but it was like trying to move through molasses. The water seemed to have thickened. Resisting our every movement, Zoe disappeared under the surface just as we reached her. "No!" I yelled, diving down after her. The salt water stung my eyes as I peered into the murky depths. For a moment I saw nothing, then a flash of pale skin and a cloud of bubbles. Zoe was about 10 feet below me, sinking fast, and wrapped around her leg was something in the dim moonlight filtering through the water. I couldn't make out details. Just a long, sinuous shape that didn't belong to any sea creature I knew. My lungs burning, I surfaced for air. Tyler was right beside me, his eyes wide with fear. "Did you see her?" he gasped. I nodded, unable to speak. We both took deep breaths and dove down again. This time there was no sign of Zoe, just endless dark water. We came up again, panting and disoriented. The shore seemed impossibly far away. "Now we have to get out of here," Tyler said, his voice cracking. "We can't help them if we're dead too." The logic of his words cut through my panic. He was right. Whatever was in the water with us, we were no match for it. Our only hope was to get to shore and call for help. We started swimming again, pushing ourselves to our limits. Every splash, every ripple in the water made my heart race. I kept expecting to feel something grab my leg, to be pulled down into the depths like Mark and Zoe. We were maybe 20 yards from shore when Tyler let out a choked gasp. I turned to see him struggling against something I couldn't see, his head barely above water. "Jess!" he cried out, reaching for me. "Help!" I swam towards him, my arms feeling like lead. Just as I reached him, his eyes went wide with terror. He opened his mouth to scream, but only a gurgle came out as he was yanked beneath the waves. I froze, treading water, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I was alone now. Whatever was in the water had taken my friends, and I was next. The rational part of my brain knew I needed to swim to get to shore, but fear had paralyzed me. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I just floated there, waiting for the inevitable. That's when I saw it. A dark shape moving through the water towards me, just beneath the surface. It was massive, easily twice the size of a person. As it got closer, I could make out more details. It wasn't one creature, but many. A writhing mass of tentacles or tendrils, all moving in unison. I'd like to say I faced my fate bravely, that I went down fighting. But the truth is, I panicked. I thrashed in the water, trying desperately to get away from the approaching horror. But it was like trying to run in a nightmare. No matter how hard I swam, I didn't seem to move. The mass was right beneath me now. I could feel the water churning around my legs as tendrils began to wrap around them. They were cold, impossibly strong, and covered in some kind of slime that made my skin crawl. I took one last, desperate gulp of air as I was pulled under. The silence of the underwater world enveloped me, broken only by the pounding of my heart in my ears. I opened my eyes, stinging from the salt water, and found myself face to face with something. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, nothing I could have even imagined. A central mass, dozens of eyes, all different sizes, all focused on me as I stared into those alien eyes, my lungs screaming for air. Something impossible happened. I heard a voice in my head.
"Do not be afraid,"
it said. The words not so much heard as felt.
"You are chosen."
The tendrils around my legs loosened, and suddenly I was being propelled upwards. I broke the surface with a gasp, gulping in air like I'd never tasted it before. To my shock, I wasn't alone. Mark, Zoe, and Tyler were there too, all looking as bewildered and terrified as I felt. What happened?" Mark stuttered, his eyes wild. "I thought I was dead." Before anyone could answer, the water around us began to glow. The creature, if that's what it was, rose partially out of the water. In the moonlight, I could see it clearly now. It was beautiful. In another worldly way, its skin shimmering with patterns of light that seemed to convey emotions, thoughts.
"You have been chosen.
The voice in our head said again.
Witnesses to the depths. Messengers to the surface."
"Witnesses to what?" Zoe asked, her voice barely a whisper. In response, the creature's lights pulsed, and suddenly our minds were filled with images. Vast underwater cities, civilizations that had risen and fallen while humanity was still learning to make fire, knowledge and technology beyond our wildest dreams.
"We have watched your kind for millennia.
The voice continued.
Now it is time for contact. You will be our ambassadors."
As quickly as it had appeared, the creature sank back into the depths. We found ourselves being gently pushed towards the shore by unseen currents. We stumbled onto the beach, our minds reeling from what we'd experienced. As the adrenaline wore off, we all began to shiver, the night air cool on our wet skin. Did that really just happen?" Tyler asked, his voice shaky. We all looked at each other, then back at the now calm ocean. The moon's reflection was undisturbed, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But we knew we had seen things that would change the world. And now, we had a message to deliver. As we huddled together on the sand, trying to process what had happened, I couldn't help but laugh. We'd come on this trip looking for one last adventure before entering the adult world. Well, we'd certainly found it. Our lives would never be the same. And somewhere out there, beneath the waves, an ancient civilization was waiting for us to tell their story, waiting for the world to finally know the truth about what lurks in the depths of our oceans. Our midnight swim had turned into the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure, and we were the ones chosen to lead the way. The heart monitor's steady beep was the only sound in the otherwise silent hospital ward. I checked my watch, 2:37 a.m. Just a few more hours until my shift ended. That's when I saw her. A patient, standing at the end of the hallway. I've been a night nurse at Mercy General Hospital for 5 years. I thought I'd seen it all. Coding patients, full moon craziness, even the occasional escaped patient from the psych ward. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It had started as a typical shift. I'd done my rounds, checked on my patients, and settled in at the nurse's station with a cup of lukewarm coffee. The 3 North Ward was unusually quiet, with only 3 patients, all stable and sleeping peacefully. I was catching up on charting when I first noticed something odd. The air felt different, heavier somehow, charged with a kind of static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I looked around wondering if a storm was rolling in, but the windows showed only clear, star-filled skies.
That's when I saw her for the first time. Just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, a figure in a pale gown at the far end of the hallway. I turned to look directly, but she was gone. I shook my head, blaming it on too little sleep and too much caffeine, but a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach told me something wasn't right. I decided to do another round just to ease my mind as I walked past the rooms. I peeked in on each patient. Mr. Johnson in 301 snoring softly. Mrs. Patel in 302, her oxygen machine humming steadily. And in 303, I froze. The bed was empty, sheets disturbed, as if someone had just gotten up. My heart raced as I checked the bathroom. Empty. I rushed back to the nurse's station, ready to call a code yellow for a missing patient. But as I reached for the phone, I saw her again. She was standing at the junction where our ward met the closed wing. Her back to me. Long, dark hair fell past her shoulders, and her thin frame was silhouetted against the darkness beyond. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "You shouldn't be out of bed. Let me help you back to your room." She didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, perfectly still. A chill ran down my spine, but I pushed it aside. I was a professional, and this was clearly a confused patient who needed help. I walked towards her, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud out on the linoleum floor. "Ma'am," I said as I got closer, "are you all right?" Still no response. I was only a few feet away now. I reached out to touch her shoulder, and my hand passed right through her. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The figure slowly turned, and I found myself staring into the face of a young woman. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were completely black, like empty voids. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but instead of words, a low, haunting moan emerged. The lights in the hallway flickered, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but in that moment, all my training, all my experience went out the window. I ran back to the nurse's station, my breath coming in short gasps. I grabbed the phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed. "Security, this is Nurse Chen on 3 North, I said as soon as they picked up. "I need assistance immediately. There's an intruder on the floor." "Intruder?" the security guard asked, sounding skeptical. "Are you sure it's not just a patient out of bed?" "No," I insisted. "This is something else. Please just get up here." I hung up and turned back to the hallway, half-half expecting to see the ghostly woman right behind me, but the corridor was empty. The oppressive atmosphere remained, though. Like the air before a thunderstorm, I forced myself to take deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. There had to be a logical explanation for what I'd seen. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank. But deep down I knew what I'd seen wasn't natural, wasn't human. The elevator dinged and 2 security guards stepped out. I quickly filled them in on what had happened, leaving out the part about my hand passing through the figure. Even in my shaken state, I knew how that would sound. "All right," the older guard said, looking concerned. "We'll do a sweep of the floor. You stay here at the station. If you see anything at all, you call us immediately." I nodded, grateful for their presence as they moved down the hallway, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. I felt some of my fear subside. Whatever was going on, I wasn't alone anymore. But as the minutes ticked by, my unease grew. The guards had been gone too long. The floor wasn't that big. They should have been back by now. I was about to call them on the radio when the lights went out. All of them at once. Even the emergency lights failed to kick in. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the computer screens at the nurse's station. In the sudden darkness, I heard it. Footsteps. Coming from the direction of the closed wing, but they didn't sound like the heavy tread of the security guards. These were lighter, almost ethereal. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam seemed pitifully small against the encompassing darkness. I swept it down the hallway and felt my blood turn to ice. She was there, the ghostly woman, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, I could make out other figures, dozens of them, all in hospital gowns, all with those same black, empty eyes. They began to move towards me, their movements jerky and unnatural. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body refusing to move. As they got closer, I began to recognize some of them. Mr. Cooper, who had died of a heart attack last month, Mrs. Sanchez, a cancer patient we'd lost just last week. And at the front, my breath caught in my throat. It was Dr. Patel, my mentor, who had passed away years ago. They surrounded me, their cold presence making it hard to breathe. I closed my eyes, certain that this was the end, but then I felt a hand on my shoulder, a warm hand. I opened my eyes to see Dr. Patel, not the ghostly version, but as I remembered him in life. He smiled at me, his eyes kind. "It's all right, Sarah," he said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "We're not here to harm you." What's happening?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "A thinning of the veil," he replied. "Once a year on this night, the boundary between our world and yours weakens. We can cross over just for a little while." "But why?" I asked, looking around at the sea of familiar faces. "Why come back?" A sad smile crossed Dr. Patel's face. "Some of us have unfinished business. Some just want to see their loved ones one last time. And some," he paused, looking at me intently, "some come to deliver a message." He leaned in close, whispering words that would change my life forever. As he spoke, the other spirits began to fade, the darkness receding. By the time he finished, I was alone again in the hallway, the lights flickering back to life. I stood there, stunned, as the reality of what had just happened washed over me. The elevator dinged, and the security guard stepped out, looking confused. "Did you call us?" one asked. "We got a call, but when we came up here earlier, everything seemed fine." I opened my mouth to explain, then closed it again. How could I possibly describe what I just experienced? "False alarm," I heard myself saying. "Everything's fine now." As they left, I sank into the chair at the nurse's station, my mind reeling. I knew that come morning, I'd have to make some difficult decisions. The message Dr. Patel had given me, it wasn't something I could ignore. But for now, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I allowed myself a moment to simply breathe, to exist in a world that had suddenly become much larger, much stranger, and infinitely more wondrous than I'd ever imagined. The night shift would never be the same again, and neither would I. The crackle of static from the baby monitor sent a chill down my spine. I'd put the kids to bed an hour ago, but what I heard next made my blood run cold. It wasn't the sound of a fussy baby or a child having a nightmare. It was a man's voice, low and menacing, whispering, "I see you." I froze, my eyes darting to the front door I'd locked hours ago, then to the stairs leading to the children's bedrooms. How could someone be up there? And more terrifying, in L. How long had they been watching us? My name is Emily, and what started as a routine babysitting gig quickly turned into the most terrifying night of my life. I'm a 17-year-old high school senior, saving up for college by watching the neighbors' kids a few nights a week. The Petersons were great. They had adorable children, Mia 5 and Ethan 2, and they always paid well. I'd been sitting for them for almost a year, and nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened until tonight. It had been a normal evening. I'd arrived at 6 p.m. just as Mr. and Mrs. Peterson were heading out for their date night. They'd left money for pizza, emergency contact numbers on the fridge, eyes and strict instructions for the kids to be in bed by 8:30. We'd be back around midnight. Mrs. Peterson had said, giving me a warm smile, "Call if you need anything." The first few hours went smoothly. We had pizza, played some board games, and I managed to get both kids bathed and in bed right on schedule. I'd settled onto the living room couch with my homework, enjoying the quiet. That's when I first noticed something odd. A flicker of movement outside the window caught my eye.
I got up to look, but the front yard was empty, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. Must have been a cab or something, I thought, shrugging it off. But as I sat back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and every creak of the old house made me jump. I turned on the TV, hoping the background noise would calm my nerves. It was just past 11 p.m. when I heard that chilling voice through the baby monitor. My first instinct was to run to get out of the house and call the police, but I couldn't leave the children. What if the intruder was already up there with them? With shaking hands, I picked up my phone. I had to call for help, but I was afraid any noise might alert the intruder. I decided to text Mr. Peterson instead. Emergency, someone in the house, call police. Seconds after I hit send, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Mr. Peterson? I declined it, terrified that the ringtone might have been heard upstairs. Instead, I texted again. Can't talk, he's upstairs with the kids. Please hurry. The response came quickly. Police on their way. We're coming home now. Stay safe. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. Should I go up, try to get the kids out, or would that put them in more danger? Before I could decide, I heard footsteps overhead. Slow, deliberate steps moving from one bedroom to the other, then silence. The baby monitor crackled to life again. Come upstairs, Emily, the voice said, sending shivers down my spine. The children want to say goodnight. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. How did he know my name? What had he done to Mia and Ethan? I looked at my phone, praying to see flashing lights outside, but the street remained dark and quiet. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand here while some maniac was upstairs with those innocent kids. I looked around for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy table lamp. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I unplugged it and gripped it tightly, my palms sweaty against. I placed my foot on the first step. It creaked loudly. I froze, listening intently, but heard nothing from upstairs. Slowly, carefully, I began to climb. Each step felt like an eternity. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. As I reached the top of the stairs, I paused, trying to decide which room to check first. Mia's room was closest. The door was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the crack. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the slight squeak of the hinges. The room was dark, illuminated only by the glow of Mia's nightlight. I could make out her small form under the covers, apparently asleep. But where was the intruder? I moved to Mia's bed, gently shaking her shoulder. "Mia," I whispered. "Mia, wake up. We need to go." She didn't stir. Fear clutched at my heart as I pulled back the covers. It wasn't Mia. It was just pillows, arranged to look like a sleeping child. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, raising the lamp, ready to swing, but the doorway was empty. The hallway beyond was dark and still. My breathing was coming in short gasps now. Where were the kids? Where was the intruder? I backed out of Mia's room, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Ethan's room was next. The door was closed. With a trembling hand, I reached for the knob. Just as my fingers touched the cool metal, I heard it, a giggle, a child's giggle, coming from downstairs. I froze, my mind reeling. How was that possible? I'd been at the bottom of the stairs this whole time. No one could have gotten past me unless they'd been down there all along. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The intruder hadn't been upstairs.
He'd been downstairs with me this whole time. And now he had the children. I turned to run back downstairs, but as I did, the door to Ethan's room swung open. The man stood there, a dark silhouette against the deeper darkness of the room. He was tall, impossibly tall, his head nearly touching the top of the doorframe. "Hello, Emily," he said, his voice the same chilling whisper I'd heard on the baby monitor. "I've been waiting for you." I didn't think, I just reacted. I swung the lamp with all my might, aiming for where I thought his head would be. There was a sickening crunch as it connected, and the figure crumpled to the ground. I didn't wait to see if he was out cold. I ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling in my haste. I could hear the children now, their voices coming from the kitchen. I burst into the kitchen, ready to grab the kids and run, but what I saw stopped me in my tracks. Mia and Ethan were sitting at the... Mr. Peterson stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Emily, there's no one else here. We came home early and found the kids awake. They said you told them they could have a midnight snack." I shook my head, unable to form words. This couldn't be happening. It had all felt so real. Mrs. Peterson guided me to a chair, her face etched with concern. "I think you might have fallen asleep, dear. Had a nightmare, perhaps?" As the adrenaline began to fade, doubt crept in. Had it all been a dream? But it had felt so vivid, so terrifyingly real. "But I hit him," I mumbled upstairs with the lamp. Mr. Peterson disappeared upstairs, returning a few moments later. "All the lamps are where they should be, Emily, and there's no one up there." I sat there, my mind reeling as the Petersons tried to comfort me. They assured me it was just a bad dream, probably brought on by stress from school. They even offered to drive me home. But as I gathered my things to leave, still shaken, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Dream or not, the fear had been real. The voice on the baby monitor, the feeling of being watched. It had all felt too vivid to be just a nightmare. As Mr. Peterson drove me home, I stared out the window at the dark, quiet streets. I knew one thing for certain. I would never, baby say. Wait, what was that? In the rear-view mirror, just for a second, I thought I saw a figure in the back seat, grinning at me with too many teeth. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just my imagination. It had to be. Right. The shimmering heat haze on the horizon morphed into a human shape, and my heart skipped a beat. A lone figure stood on the empty road ahead, thumb outstretched as we sped past. I caught a glimpse of a weary face and desperate eyes. My wife Sarah let out a small gasp. "Did you see that?" she asked. I nodded, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, because I had seen it, and I knew we'd see it again. The same hitchhiker, miles down the road, impossibly ahead of us. My name is Mike Callahan, and what started as a cross-country road trip with my wife quickly descended into a nightmare that defied explanation. We had been driving for hours through the Nevada desert, the monotonous landscape broken only by the occasional gas station or ramshackle diner. It was our 5th wedding anniversary, and we decided to drive from our home in San Francisco to the Grand Canyon, taking the scenic route through the heart of the American Southwest. The first few days had been great. We'd sung along to old songs on the radio, played silly road trip games, and marveled at the changing landscapes. But as we entered the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert, something changed. The air felt heavier, the silence more river. Even the radio seemed affected, picking up nothing but static no matter how much I fiddled with it.
The dial we first saw the hitchhiker, about an hour into the Nevada stretch, he appeared suddenly as if materializing out of the haze. A lone figure on the side of the road, arm outstretched, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses as we zipped past at 70 miles per hour. I caught only a fleeting glimpse, tan skin, ragged clothes, a backpack that had seen better days. "Should we have stopped?" Sarah asked, twisting in her seat to look back. I shook my head. "You know the rules, honey. Never pick up hitchhikers, especially out here in the middle of nowhere." She nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "I hope he'll be okay. It's brutal out there," I assured her. Someone else would probably pick him up, and we continued on our way.
but I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. About 20 minutes later, we saw him again. Same pose, same clothes, same desperate stance. But this was impossible. We had been driving at top speed, and there was the distance just gone there 1 second and vanished the next. Sarah and I looked at each other, both pale and shaking. "Did that just happen?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to form words. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what we just experienced. But there was no making sense of it. It defied all logic, all reason. With shaking hands, I put the car back into drive and slowly accelerated. We drove in silence, both lost in our own thoughts, jumping at every shadow and shimmering heat mirage on the horizon as the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. We spotted a small diner on the side of the road. By unspoken agreement, I pulled in. We both needed a break, a chance to collect ourselves and maybe find some normali and a cup of coffee and a slice of pie. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an old man in a booth by the window. As we slid into a booth, a waitress approached, her name tag identifying her as Darlene. "What can I get you folks?" she asked, her pen poised over her notepad. We ordered coffee and pie, and as Darlene walked away, I found myself blurting out, "Have you ever heard any strange stories about this stretch of road?" Darlene paused, turning back to us with a frown. Strange how I hesitated, not sure how to explain without sounding crazy, like unexplainable things, people seeing things that can't be real. A look passed over Darlene's face, concern mixed with something else. Recognition, maybe? She glanced around the diner, then leaned in close. "You saw him, didn't you?" she whispered. "The hitchhiker." Sarah gasped, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "You know about him?" I asked. Darlene nodded solemnly. "He's been haunting this road for as long as anyone can remember. Some say he's the ghost of a man who died out here forever trying to catch a wrong to safety. Others say he's something else, something not of this world." She straightened up, her expression becoming guarded. "But that's just silly, superstition, of course. I'm sure whatever you saw was just a trick of the light. The desert can play havoc with your senses, you know?" With that, she hurried off to get our order. Sarah and I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what we just heard. "Mike," Sarah said finally, her voice trembling, "I want to go home. I don't care about the Grand Canyon anymore. I just want to get out of here." I nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "We'll leave first thing in the morning. We'll find a motel for the night and then head back to California at dawn." But as I said it, a nagging doubt gnawed at me. Would it be that easy? Would the hitchhiker let us leave? We ate our pie in silence, both lost in our own thoughts as we were paying. I noticed the old man in the booth by the window watching us intently as part of me screamed not to engage, not to know more. The old man's rheumy eyes fixed on me.
"He's not looking for a ride, son. He's looking for a replacement. Someone to take his place on this God-forsaken stretch of road so he can finally move on."
A chill ran through me. "How do you know all this?"
A sad smile crossed the old man's weathered face. "Because I've been running from him for 40 years. Ever since that night, I drove past him thinking I was being smart by not picking up a hitchhiker." He turned back to the window, his eyes scanning the darkening desert outside.
"You can't escape him,"
he repeated softly.
"No matter how far or fast you drive. He'll always be there, waiting until you give in or until you find someone else to take your place."
Sarah tugged at my arm, her eyes wide with fear.
"Let's go, Mike, please."
I nodded, guiding her out of the diner as we walked to our car. The old man's words echoed in my head. You can't escape him.
We drove through the night, pushing the speed limit, both of us jumping at every shadow on the road. But no matter how fast we went, no matter how many miles we put behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. And every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see a gaunt figure in the back seat grinning at me with too many teeth, ready to claim his replacement. The desert stretched endlessly before us, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that our journey was far from over. The hitchhiker was out there waiting, and sooner or later, we would have to face him again. The first knock came at midnight, a soft tapping that barely registered over the howling wind. I ignored it, chalking it up to debris blown against the lighthouse door. But as the night wore on, the knocking grew louder, more insistent. By 3 a.m., it had become a pounding that shook the very foundation of my solitary home. And still, the storm raged on, making any visitors impossible. As I descended the spiral staircase, flashlight in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever waited on the other side of that door wasn't human.
My name is Jack Harper, and I've been the keeper of the Black Rock Lighthouse for the past 5 years, perched on a tiny rocky island off the coast of Maine. Black Rock has been guiding ships safely through treacherous waters for over a century. It's a solitary life, but one I've grown to love. The peaceful isolation, the rhythm of the tides, the satisfaction of maintaining this beacon of hope for sailors. It suited me perfectly, or at least it did, until that stormy night in late October. The day had started normally enough. I'd gone about my usual routine, checking the light, maintaining the equipment, logging weather conditions. But as evening approached, the sky had darkened ominously. The weather report crackled over my...
In full force, rain lashed against the windows, driven sideways by howling winds. Waves crashed against the rocky shore, sending spray high enough to reach the lower windows of the lighthouse as I climbed the stairs to light the beacon. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was why I was here. On nights like this, my light might be the only thing standing between a ship and disaster. I settled in for a long night, brewing a pot of strong coffee and pulling out a well-worn paperback. The storm provided a constant backdrop of sound. Wind, rain, crashing waves. It was almost soothing in its intensity. That's when I heard it. A knock at the door. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Who could possibly be out there in this weather? The island was uninhabited save for me, and the nearest shore was miles away. I returned to my book, but a few minutes later I heard it again. 3 distinct knocks, barely audible over the storm. I set my book down, listening intently for several long moments. There was nothing but the sound of the storm. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd imagined it, the knocking came again, louder this time. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't possible. No one could have made it to the island in this weather. And even if they had, they'd have radioed ahead. I always kept my radio on, especially during storms. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some debris had blown against the door, or perhaps some part of the lighthouse was coming loose in the wind. But as the night wore on, the knocking became more frequent, more insistent. It moved around the lighthouse, sometimes at the front door, sometimes at the back, occasionally even seeming to come from the windows high above. By 3 a.m., it had become a constant rhythmic pounding that I could feel through the floors. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away. Fear and curiosity warred within me. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to wait out the storm and pretend I couldn't hear the impossible knocking. But another part of me needed to know, needed to understand what was happening. With shaking hands, I picked up my heavy-duty flashlight. Its weight was reassuring in my hand,
As I began to descend the spiral staircase, the pounding grew louder. As I approached the door, I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my feet. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty. On the flashlight, I reached for the door handle, then hesitated. What if it was someone who needed help? A shipwreck survivor, perhaps, who had somehow made it to the island. I couldn't just leave them out there in the storm. Taking a deep breath, I undid the locks and pulled the door open. The wind nearly knocked me off my feet, driving rain and sea spray into my face. I raised the flashlight, squinting against the onslaught. There was no one there. I swept the beam of light across the small porch, then out towards the rocks. Nothing but wind and flooded through me, followed quickly by confusion. If no one was there, what had been making that noise? That's when I saw it. Just at the edge of my flashlight's beam, down by the shore, a figure, standing motionless. Amidst the chaos of the storm, I blinked. Sure, I was seeing things, but when I looked again, and it was still there, tall and thin, it seemed to be wearing some kind of long coat that whipped about in the wind. Its face was hidden in shadow. "Hello?" I called out, my voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "Do you need help?" The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, facing the lighthouse, facing me. A wave of unease washed over me. Something about this was very, very wrong. I was about to retreat inside and radio for help when the figure moved. It raised one arm, pointing directly at me, and then, impossibly, it began to walk forward, not along the shore, but straight towards me, across the surface of the churning water. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. I must be dreaming or hallucinating from lack of sleep. But even through the thick door, I could hear it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the path to the lighthouse. And then, the knocking began. Again, no longer all around, but focused on the door right in front of me. Slow, heavy thuds that shook dust from the ceiling. I backed away, my mind reeling. What was out there? What did it want? The pounding continued, growing louder, more insistent. I could see the door shuddering in its frame with each impact. I turned and ran, taking the stairs two at a time. I didn't stop until I reached the top of the lighthouse, bursting out onto the gallery that surrounded the beacon. The storm raged around me, wind and rain lashing at my face. I gripped the railing, peering down at the entrance to the lighthouse. The door was open. As I watched, a figure emerged. Even from this height, I could tell it wasn't human. Its movements were too fluid, its proportions all wrong. It paused, then slowly turned its face up towards me. I caught a glimpse of pale, waterlogged flesh, of eyes that glowed with an eerie phosphorescent light, of a mouth that opened far too wide, revealing row upon row of sharp teeth. It raised one long, distorted arm, pointing at me again, and then it began to climb. Not using the stairs inside, but scaling the outside of the lighthouse. Its movements were quick, jerky, like a spider crawling up a wall. I stood, frozen in horror, unable to move as it drew closer. The wind carried its voice to me, a sound like rushing water and grinding stones that somehow formed words. "Keeper," it said, "your time has come." In that moment, I understood the stories I'd dismissed as superstition, the warnings from the old-timers about the true duties of a lighthouse keeper. We weren't just here to guide ships. We were guardians, keeping at bay things that lurked in the deep, things that saw our lights as a challenge, and sometimes those things came to replace us. As the creature reached the gallery, pulling itself up with those long, distorted limbs, I made a choice. I was the keeper of Black Rock Lighthouse, and I would do my duty. I turned to the beacon, its light still shining bright despite the storm. With a silent apology to any ships that might be relying on it, I switched it off. The creature paused as if confused by the sudden darkness,
I took advantage of its hesitation, ducking past it and racing down the stairs. I could hear it behind me, chittering and scratching as it gave chase, but I had lived in this lighthouse for years. I knew every step, every turn. I reached the bottom and ran out into the storm, not stopping until I reached the shore there. I turned to face the creature that had followed me. It loomed over me, its form seeming to shift and flow in the darkness. But now that we were away from the lighthouse, it seemed less sure of itself. "You are the keeper," it said, its voice full of confusion and what might have been fear. I stood my ground, rain and sea spray soaking me to the bone. "I am," I replied, "and this is my light, my duty. You have no power here." For a long moment we stood there, human and monster, facing each other amidst the storm. Then, slowly, the creature began to retreat. It moved backwards, step by step, until it reached the water's edge. With one last look at me, it sank beneath the waves. As soon as it disappeared, I ran back to the lighthouse. My hands were shaking as I relit the beacon, its bright beam cutting through the storm. Once more, I spent the rest of the night in the lantern room, watching the sea for any sign of the creature's return. But there was nothing, just the gradually calming storm and eventually the first light of dawn. As I sit here now, writing this in my log, I'm still not sure I believe what happened. Perhaps it was all a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But I know deep in my bones that it was real, that there are things out there in the deep that see our lights as a challenge, and that as long as there are lighthouse keepers, we'll be here to face them. The storm has passed and a new day is beginning. I have work to do, cleaning up debris, checking for damage, logging the night's events in carefully coded language that won't raise alarms with my superiors. But as I go about my duties, I'll keep one eye on the sea, because I know now that my job is more than just keeping the light burning. I'm the keeper of Black Rock Lighthouse, and I'll be ready when the deep.
Knocking comes again. The crunch of leaves under my boots echoed through the eerily silent forest. I'd been a ranger here for 15 years, but I'd never seen the woods so still, so empty. No bird song, no scurrying of small animals, not even the buzz of insects. Just an impressive silence that seemed to swallow every sound. As I pushed deeper into the heart of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap, one that had been waiting for me for a very long time. My name is Sarah Connor, and I've dedicated my life to protecting the Whispering Pines National Forest. At 38, I thought I'd seen it all. Wildfires, lost hikers, the occasional poacher, but nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered that crisp autumn morning. It started with reports from hikers about strange markings on trees. At first, I dismissed them as the work of bored teenagers or overzealous nature enthusiasts. But as the reports kept coming in, each more unsettling than the last, I knew I had to investigate. I set out at dawn, my backpack loaded with supplies for a day's hike. The morning was cool and misty, typical for October in this part of the country, but as I drove deeper into the forest, following the GPS coordinates from the latest report, something felt off. The mist seemed thicker than usual, clinging to the trees in a way that made them look almost skeletal. And the silence. God. The silence, God. I've always loved the peacefulness of the forest, but this was different. This was wrong. I parked my truck at the trailhead and set out on foot. The path was familiar. I'd hiked it countless times before, but today it felt alien. The trees seemed to loom over me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. About 2 miles in, I saw the first marking. It was carved into the trunk of an old oak, the wood still oozing sap. The symbol was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a complex swirl of lines that seemed to shift and change. The longer I looked at it, I snapped a picture with my phone, then reached out to touch the carving. The wood was warm beneath my fingers, much warmer than it should have been. And was it pulsing? I jerked my hand back, my heart racing. This was no prank. Whatever had made this mark wasn't human. As I continued down the trail, I found more symbols. They appeared at irregular intervals, always on the largest, oldest trees. Each one was different, but they all gave me the same uneasy feeling, like they were watching me. The deeper I went, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew larger, their trunks twisted into impossible shapes,
Undergrowth became dense with plants I didn't recognize, their leaves an unnatural shade of purple. I checked my GPS, frowning at the screen. According to this, I was miles off course in a part of the forest that didn't match any of my maps, but that was impossible. I knew these woods like the back of my hand. Just as I was considering turning back, I heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting coming from somewhere up ahead. The sound sent a chill down my spine, but I pressed on. I had to know what was happening to my forest. I emerged into a clearing and froze, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. In the center stood a massive stone structure, a circle of rough H monoliths, each easily 20 feet tall. They were covered in the same strange symbols I'd seen on the tree, but it was what was happening inside the circle that made my blood run cold. A group of figures dressed in long robes were moving in a slow, synchronized dance. Their chanting grew louder as I watched, the words in no language I'd ever heard. I ducked behind a tree, my heart pounding. What the hell was this? Some kind of cult? But how had they built this structure without anyone noticing? As I watched, one of the figures broke away from the group. It moved to the center of the circle. Raising its arms, the chanting reached a fever pitch, and suddenly the air in the center of the circle began to ripple like heat haze, but more substantial, more real. The ripple grew, expanding outward until it formed a shimmering portal about 10 feet east across, and through that portal, I caught a glimpse of something, a landscape that wasn't Earth, skies that weren't our skies, creatures that defied description. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, I'm not sure, but suddenly, all activity in the circle stopped as one. The robed figures turned to look in my direction. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps unnaturally fast as they're chanting now, a guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that twisted version of my forest. But eventually I burst out of the trees and found myself back at my truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. As I peeled out of the parking area, I chanced to look in the rearview mirror. The forest behind me was dark, the trees pressing close to the road, and just at the edge of the tree line, I saw them, a line of robed figures standing perfectly still, watching me drive away. I didn't stop driving until I reached the ranger station. My colleagues Mike took one look at my pale, sweat-soaked face and sat me down with a Jesus. Cup of strong coffee, I told him everything, my words tumbling out in a frantic jumble. To his credit, Mike listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice gentle, "I think you need to take some time off. The stress of the job, it can get to you sometimes." "No," I cut him off. "Mike, I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. Check my phone." I took pictures of the symbols. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. But when I opened the photo gallery, my heart sank. The pictures were there, but they were wrong. Blurry, distorted, showing nothing but indistinct shapes in the woods. Mike patted my shoulder. "Get some rest, Sarah. We'll talk more tomorrow." But I knew there would be no rest for me. Not now. Not ever again. Because I knew the truth. Something was happening in my forest. Something beyond human understanding. And I was the only one who knew about it. In the days that followed, I tried to go back to find the clearing, to gather evidence. But it was like the forest itself was working against me. Trails that should have been familiar led me in circles. My GPS malfunctioned. Even my compass spun wildly, unable to find true north. I've spent countless hours poring over old books, researching occult symbols and interdimensional theories. I've reached out to experts in fields ranging from archaeology to quantum physics. Most dismiss me as a crackpot. A few have shown interest, but none have been able to explain what I saw. As I sit here now, writing this down,
I can't help but look out my window at the forest that has been my home for so long. It looks the same as it always has, peaceful, serene. But I know the truth. I know what lurks in its depths. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear it. The chanting carried on the wind. A reminder that what I saw was real. That somewhere out there in the heart of my forest, a door has been opened. A door to somewhere else. And I can't help but wonder what came through that door. And more terrifyingly, what might be coming next. I know one thing for certain. I can't ignore this. I can't pretend it didn't happen. Whatever is going on in Whispering Pines, whatever cosmic horror has taken root in my forest, I have to face it. I have to find a way to close that door. Because if I don't, who will? I'm just one park ranger, facing something beyond human comprehension. But I'm also the only one who knows the truth, the only one who can do something about it. So tomorrow, I'll go back into the forest. I'll keep searching. Is setting now casting long shadows across my yard. In a few hours, night will fall. And in the darkness, I know the chanting will begin again. But this time, I'll be ready. This time I'll find answers, whatever happens. Whatever I discover, I know my life will never be the same. The world I knew, the reality I understood, has been forever changed. But I'm not afraid. I'm determined, because the forest is calling, and I have to answer. The beam of my flashlight cut through the murky water, revealing a twisted landscape of stalactites and narrow passages. My heart raced as I checked my air gauge. 700 psi, barely enough for 10 minutes. That's when I saw it, a flash of movement in the darkness beyond my light. Something was down here with me, something that didn't belong in this underwater cave. And as my flashlight flickered, threatening to plunge me into total darkness, I realized with growing horror that I had lost my guideline back to the surface. My name is Alex Chen, and I'm a cave diver, or at least I was until that fateful dive in the cenotes of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. I'd been exploring underwater caves for over a decade, pushing the limits of human endurance and technology to uncover the secrets hidden beneath the Earth's surface. But nothing in my experience could have prepared me for what I encountered in the depths of Sasakanern. It was supposed to be a routine dive, a chance to map out a newly discovered section of the vast underwater cave system. I'd assembled a small team, myself, my longtime diving partner Mike, and our local guide Carlos. We'd spent days preparing, checking and double-checking our equipment, reviewing our dive plan and discussing contingencies. The morning of the dive, we arrived at the cenote early, the jungle around us still shrouded in mist. As we geared up, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Maybe it was the unusual stillness of the air, or the way the usually crystal-clear water seemed darker, more opaque than normal. "You okay, Alex?" Mike asked, noticing my hesitation. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little nervous energy, you know how it is, before a big dive." He nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Mike and I had been diving together for years. He knew me well enough to sense when something was off. We did our final equipment checks and slipped into the water. The coolness was a shock after the humid air, but it helped clear my head as we descended into the mouth of the cave. I felt the familiar mix of excitement and trepidation that came with every dive. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. We moved slowly through the cave system, mapping as we went, marveling at the otherworldly beauty of the underwater formations. Delicate stalactites hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, while stalagmites reached up from the cave floor like the grasping fingers of some subterranean giant. We were about 3,000 feet into the cave when things started to go wrong. I was in the lead with Mike about 20 feet behind me and Carlos bringing up the rear. I had just squeezed through a narrow passage when my primary light flickered.
I paused, tapping the light. It stabilized, but the beam seemed weaker than before. I made a mental note to switch to my backup if it happened again. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving at the edge of my light's beam. It was gone so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. I signaled to Mike, asking if he'd seen anything. He shook his head, gesturing for me to continue. I hesitated, then pressed on. We were entering a large chamber when my light flickered again, this time going out completely for a heart-stopping moment before sputtering back to life. In that brief instant of darkness, I felt something brush past me, something large. I spun around, my heart pounding. My light revealed nothing but empty water and the concerned face of Mike behind me. I signaled that I was switching to my backup light, trying to keep my hand steady as I made the change. As the brighter beam of my backup light cut through the water, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Our guideline, the thin rope that was our lifeline back to the surface, had been severed. The cut end drifted lazily in the water, mocking us with its frayed edges. I turned to Mike, my eyes wide with panic behind my mask. He had seen it too. We both knew what this meant. Without the guideline in a cave system this complex, we were in serious trouble. Carlos swam up, alerted by our unusual behavior. When he saw the cut line, his eyes went wide. He immediately began to tie it back together, his movements quick and precise despite the gravity of the situation. As he worked, I scanned the chamber with my light. That's when I saw it again, a shape moving in the darkness beyond the reach of my beam. It was larger this time and moved with a fluid grace that was decidedly not human. I tapped Mike's arm, pointing. He nodded, having seen it too. We both watched, barely breathing, as the shape moved along the edge of the chamber. It was hard to make out details, but I could swear I saw the glint of scales, the flicker of a tail, far too large to belong to any fish I knew of. Carlos finished repairing the line and gave us the OK signal, but as we prepared to continue, my light caught something on the cave floor. Swimming down for a closer look, I felt my stomach drop. There, half buried in the sill, was a diving mask, and not just any mask. It was an antique, the kind used by divers half a century ago. As I reached for it, a powerful current suddenly surged through the chamber. It caught us off guard, spinning us around and stirring up a cloud of silk that reduced visibility to 0 in seconds. I felt the guideline go tow in my hand and clung to it, fighting against the current through the mask current. I could see the dim glow of Mike and Carlos's lights as they too held on to the line. The current lasted only a few seconds, but when it subsided and the silt began to settle, I realized with horror that I was alone. Mike and Carlos were gone, along with the guideline. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, fighting the urge to hyperventilate. Panic was a diver's worst enemy, especially in a situation like this. I checked my air gauge, 700 psi, enough for about 10 minutes if I stayed calm. I had to find Mike, and Carlos had to find the guideline. I began to move slowly through the chamber, sweeping my light back and forth. The water was still cloudy, with disturbed silt, reducing my visibility to just a few feet. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rock formation looked like it might be my lost companions. That's when I saw it again. The large shape, moving with that unnaturally fluid grace. It was clearer this time, closer. I caught a glimpse of a long serpentine body, of fins that looked more like limbs, and eyes, large, intelligent eyes that reflected my light back at me with an almost metallic sheen. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before, and it was watching me. I froze, torn between the need to find my friends and the primal urge to flee from this unknown creature. As I hovered there, my light began to flicker again. Panic surged through me. If my light went out, down here in the absolute darkness of the underwater cave, I was as good as dead. I fumbled from my backup to my backup, a small chemical light stick attached to my gear as I cracked it, casting a weak green glow around me. I saw movement again. The creature was circling me now, moving in ever-tightening spirals. My air was running low, my lights were failing. I was lost in an underwater labyrinth, and I was being stalked by something that by all rights shouldn't exist. In that moment, faced with the possibility of my own death, a strange calm came over me. If this was to be my end, I would meet it with open eyes. I stopped trying to flee and instead turned to face the creature as it came into the dim glow of my light stick. I saw it clearly for the first time. It was beautiful in an alien way. A mix of eel and salamander, with hints of something almost human in its eyes. And the shape of its head, it regarded me with what I could swear was curiosity. Slowly, the absolute darkness of the underwater cave. I was as good as dead. I fumbled from my backup to my backup, a small chemical light stick attached to my gear as I cracked it, casting a weak green glow around me. I saw movement again. The creature was circling me now, moving in ever-tightening spirals. My air was running low. My lights were failing. I was lost in an underwater labyrinth, and I was being stalked by something that by all rights shouldn't exist. In that moment, faced with the possibility of my own death, a strange calm came over me. If this was to be my end, I would meet it with open eyes. I stopped trying to flee and instead turned to face the creature as it came into the dim glow of my light stick. I saw it clearly for the first time. It was beautiful in an alien way, a mix of eel and salamander, with hints of something almost human in its eyes and the shape of its head. It regarded me with what I could swear was curiosity. Slowly, deliberately, it raised one of its limb-likey fins and pointed, not at me, but past me, down one of the tunnels leading out of the chamber. I hesitated, unsure. Was it trying to help me or lead me further into danger? But with my air running critically low, I realized I had no choice. I had to trust it. I began to swim in the direction it had indicated. To my surprise, it swam alongside me, its body undulating gracefully through the water. As we moved, I began to see signs I recognized, markers left by previous divers. We were heading towards an exit. Just as my air gauge hit 0, we emerged into another chamber. There, to my immense relief, were Mike and Carlos, looking as shocked to see me as I was to see them. And beyond them, the shimmer of open water. As we ascended, I looked back one last time. The creature hovered at the edge of the cave entrance, watching us go. It raised its fin in what I could only interpret as a wave, then vanished back into the depths. On the surface, we had a lot of explaining to do, to each other, to the authorities, to the scientific community. Our story of a lost underground creature guiding a diver to safety was met with skepticism by most, but I know what I saw. I haven't been cave diving since that day. The memory of those intelligent eyes and the darkness of that alien yet somehow familiar creature has stayed with me. It's changed how I see the world, how I understand the limits of what we know. There are things down there in the dark places of our world that defy explanation. Things that challenge everything we think we know about life on this planet. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, these things might just save us when we need it most. As I sit here writing this account, I can't help but wonder, will I ever see that creature again? And if I do, will I have the courage to follow it back into the depths, to uncover the secrets it guards? Only time will tell. But one thing's for certain, the underwater world will never look the same to me again. Up at the darkening sky, a frown creasing my forehead. The weather report had promised clear skies for at least another week as the snowfall intensified, obscuring the view of the valley below my cabin. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the sudden drop in temperature. Something was very wrong in these mountains, and I had a sinking feeling that the manuscript I'd come here to write was about to become terrifyingly real. My name is Liam Carter, and until that moment I was just another struggling novelist seeking solitude to finish my breakout book. At 35, I'd had moderate success with a few thriller novels, but nothing that could be called a real career. This new book was supposed to change all that. A horror story set in a remote mountain cabin where the protagonist finds herself isolated by a freak storm and stalked by something that shouldn't exist. I'd rented this cabin in the Rockies for a month, planning to immerse myself in the atmosphere and bang out the first draft. The owner, an elderly man named Frank, had given me an odd look when I told him what I was writing. "You might want to be careful what you wish for up here," he said. his weathered face serious. These mountains have a way of responding to people's thoughts. I'd laughed it off at the time, chalking it up to local superstition. Now, as the snow swirled around my cabin, those words came back to haunt me. I closed my laptop and moved to the window, peering out at the rapidly whitening landscape. The snow was falling so thickly now that I could barely see the tree line at the edge of the clearing. My SUV, parked about 50 feet from the cabin, was already half buried. A gust of wind howled around the eaves of the cabin, sounding almost like a voice. I shook my head, trying to dispel the fanciful thought. I was letting the atmosphere get to me, that's all this was. Exactly the kind of weather I'd been hoping for to set the mood for my writing. I should be thrilled, so why did I feel like I was being watched? I turned away from the window, deciding to stoke up the fire and make some coffee. As I moved towards the fireplace, something caught my eye. There in the fresh snow on the cabin's small porch was a footprint. A very large, very inhuman footprint. My heart began to race. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light, or maybe some snow had fallen from the roof in a peculiar pattern. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the front door. The icy wind hit me like a physical blow, driving snow into my face. I raised the flashlight, illuminating the porch. The footprint was still there, even clearer now. It was huge, easily twice the size of my own foot, with long claw-like toes, and it wasn't alone. There was a trail of them, leading away from the cabin and into the woods. I slammed the door shut, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. The creature I'd been writing about, a sort of hybrid between a Yeti and a Wendigo, wasn't real. It was fiction, a product of my imagination. But as another howl of wind shook the cabin, sounding even more like a monstrous cry, I wasn't so sure anymore. I ran to my laptop, opening the document I'd been working on. My eyes scanned the words I'd written just hours earlier. The creature left tracks in the fresh snow, massive footprints that led into the dark heart of the forest. As night fell and the storm intensified, Sarah knew she was no longer alone in her mountain refuge. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. This was insane. I was letting my imagination run wild. That's all. There had to be a rational explanation. But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew deep down in that primal part of my brain that deals in instinct and survival, I knew something was out there, something I had brought into being with my words. I spent the next hour securing the cabin as best I could. I closed all the shutters, locked and barricaded the doors, and built up the fire until the main room was almost uncomfortably warm. All the while, I could hear the storm raging outside, punctuated by that haunting, almost human cry. As night fell, the power went out. One moment I was sitting in the warm glow of the electric lights, the next I was plunged into darkness, save for the flickering light of the fire. I fumbled for my flashlight, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm, a heavy tread on the porch steps, followed by a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the cabin. It was here. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. What had I written? What weaknesses had I given this creature in my story? The protagonist had discovered that the monster couldn't cross running water. But there was no stream between me and it, just a door that suddenly seemed terribly flimsy. A massive shape appeared at the window, blocking out what little light came from the snow-reflected moon. I caught a glimpse of glowing eyes, of teeth that seemed too numerous and too sharp to be real. The window shattered inward, and with it came the cold, not just the chill of the storm, but a bone-deep cold that seemed to sap the very life from the air. The fire guttered and died, plunging the cabin into darkness. I ran through the kitchen, down the short hallway to the bedroom. I slammed the door shut behind me, knowing even as I did so that it was futile. This thing, this creature of my own creation, wouldn't be stopped by a wooden door. As if in response to my thoughts, a massive force hit the other side of the door. The wood splintered, and through the cracks I saw a clawed hand covered in thick, matted fur. In that moment, staring death in the face, my writer's mind kicked in.
If I had written this creature into existence, could I write it out? It was a desperate, crazy idea, but it was all I had. I grabbed my laptop from the bedside table, flipping it open. The battery icon showed less than 10% remaining. It was just would have to be enough as the creature continued to batter at the door. I began to type. My fingers flew over the keys, the words pouring out of me in a desperate stream of consciousness, but the creature was just a manifestation of fear, a creation of the mind, given form by the unique properties of this mountain. As Liam faced it, truly faced it, he realized the power lay within him, the power of creation and of dissolution. The door exploded inward. I looked up, my eyes meeting those of the creature. It was exactly as I had imagined it. Massive fur, covered with a face that was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth, and roared. But as it lunged for me, something changed. Its form seemed to waver like a mirage in the desert heat. I kept typing, pouring every ounce of will I had into the words. The creature's form began to dissolve, breaking apart like mist in the morning sun. Its roar of triumph turned to one of confusion, then fear. In moments, it was gone, leaving behind nothing but a cold wind and the lingering scent of pine and snow. I looked up from the screen. The room was empty. The broken door hung from its hinges, letting in a swirl of snow, but of the creature there was no sign. Had it all been in my imagination? A hallucination brought on by stress and isolation? But then I saw them. Massive footprints in the snow on the bedroom floor, already beginning to melt in the relative warmth of the cabin. It had been real, all of it, and I had banished it with nothing but words. As the adrenaline began to fade, leaving me shaky and exhausted, I couldn't help but laugh. It was hysterical, bordering on manic, but it was real laughter because I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had just lived through the most incredible story of my life. The storm began to abate as dawn broke. As I stood on the porch watching the sun rise over the snow-covered landscape, I felt a sense of awe and terror at the power of imagination, of words. The mountains around me seemed to whisper with secrets, with stories untold. I knew then that I would stay, not just for the month I had planned, but for as long as it took, because there were more stories here, more truths to be uncovered, and I was the one to write them. As I turned to go back inside, I saw Frank's truck making its way up the snow-covered road. He got out, his eyes scanning the damage to the cabin before settling on me. "Looks like you had quite a night," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. I nodded, unable to find the words to explain what had happened. Frank looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "Come on," he said, gesturing to his truck. "Let's get you some breakfast. And then, if you're ready, I've got..." Also exhilarating because now I knew the truth. Stories had power, words had power, and I was just beginning to understand how to use them.